Up. I know we've got a lot of interested individuals in the room. We're going to go through the committee real quick as far as introductions because we do have 3 members appointed by the governor, so they might not be, for those of you that are that do travel the legislative committee circuit, we got some new faces. So first of all, I'm the chairman of the House, Representative Lindholm. I represent House District number 1, and this is my co-chairman, Senator.
Senator Arthur Driskill, Senate District 1. We've got 2 number 1s here.
I'm Senator Chris Roberts, Senate District 9. We're in that district right now.
David Pope, and I was one of the members appointed by the governor.
Representative Jared Olson, House District 11, just over the hill.
Caitlin Long, also one of the civilians appointed by the governor. I'm a Laramie native and spending a lot of time in the Bitcoin and blockchain space professionally.
I'm Matt Kaufman. I'm an attorney from Cheyenne with Hathaway & Coons. I practice a lot of business, corporate, securities law.
Okay, and just as a reminder, the members, we are live streaming this event. And you can see the cameras there and there. So if you've got social media, throw them out there so folks can watch. And also speak or kind of pull your microphones if needed a little bit, and make sure that you're speaking into them. That way it's picked up. Are we good so far back there, guys?
Good.
Okay, so I just got told that opposite. Pull it away. They're really strong. So, right. So I do want to recognize some of the other elected officials in the audience. We've got Representative Bill Henderson who's joining us today. Representative Jim Blackburn is joining us. And now Treasurer Mark Gordon just walked in. So welcome and thank you guys for attending. I can say that without doubt those guys were pretty key on passing our prior legislation to include Treasurer Mark Gordon's input. So moving right on, I think we've got some rules to adopt. Chris, is that correct?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a matter of housekeeping. The task force just needs to adopt the standard interim committee rules with other committees. The rules have been provided in your handouts and they're in the back for the public review. So if someone would care to make a motion to adopt the rules.
So moved by Senator Roberts, second by Ms. Long. Any discussion on the proposed interim committee rules? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. Motion carries, rules are adopted. So going on to that, our next item for our list is the Secretary of State's office. And we're going to jump right into that. And that's in regards to corporate entity and House Bill number 70, notice of intent filings and an update from the Secretary of State's office. So we have Ms. Wheeler, the Deputy Secretary of State, and Ms. James, both individuals pretty key and integral, and they're the boots on the ground that are making this legislation possible. So welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, members of the task force. I'm Karen Wheeler, the Deputy Secretary of State, and we are certainly glad to be here this morning talking to you about all of the bills that went through and the activity that's going on in our office. And we're very excited to work with you throughout this interim on this topic. So with that, I will go through the information that we did provide you earlier and answer any questions that you have. So we were asked to provide the task force the number of entities that have been formed since February 1st, 2018. And we went through May 11th, 2018. That contained certain terms within the entity name. So we ran analytics and we broke out for you, as you can see in the information we sent to you, the new entities that have been formed whose entity names contained the terms blockchain, bit, token, crypto, digital, and coin. And at the end of each category, we also broke out by the types of entities that we formed. So for instance, under the blockchain, we had 43 entities formed that had the term blockchain within their name. Of those 43 entities, 9 were profit corporations, 32 were limited liability companies, and 2 were registered limited liability partnerships. Next, we took the term crypto. And we had 40 entities that were filed that had that term within their name. Of those entities, 11 were profit corporations, 26 were limited liability companies, and 3 were limited partnerships. Next, we have the term BIT. We had 18 entities that had that term within their entity name, 10 were corporations, and 8 were limited liability companies. Next, we took the term digital. We had 33 entities that have that term within their name. 10 are public corporations, 21 are limited liability companies, and 2 are non-profit corporations. Next, the term token. We had 3 entities that have the term token in their name, and all 3 of those are limited liability companies. And finally, the term coin. We had 32 entities that were formed that have the word coin within their name. 6 are profit corporations, 25 are limited liability companies, and we have 1 nonprofit. We have a total of 169 entities. Of those, 46 are profit corporations, 115 are limited liability companies, 3 are limited partnerships, and 3 are nonprofit corporations, and 2 are registered limited liability partnerships.
Is there any questions for Deputy Wheeler in regards to the corporation one?
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead, Senator.
Thank you, sir. What this do as far as the overall pace of filings and registration? Did we see a spike as a result of it, or would this have been basically kind of not even noticed?
Ms. Wheeler.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, it did not provide a spike. We are seeing the typical gradual growth that we always see. Now, keep in mind, the session has just ended, and we did just run these in May. I think we'll have a better feel for the growth that this will bring after the Series LLC bill goes into effect on July 1st.
Okay. Mr. Pope.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, Ms. Wheeler, do we have a total of all entities filed from February 1st until, or through this point in May, and for comparison purposes?
Mr. Chairman and Mr. Pope, for this time frame, no, but we have looked at, and we did provide this to the Joint Corporations Committee, or I did speak about that at the committee. We looked at our growth from fiscal year to fiscal year, the increase from fiscal year 2011 through May 18th, 2018, keeping in mind that this fiscal year ends June 30th. And we looked at the growth in each fiscal year, and I can tell you the growth ending for fiscal year 2018 is modest, it's very small right now compared to the other years. And there could be a lot of factors that go into play. Our online filing could be leveling out, could pick back up. We had conversations certain taxes that might go into play, and businesses are very sensitive to predictability and stability, so there could be a lot of factors that go into it.
Well, yes, please. Mr. Chairman, through you. Ms. Wheeler, is there a way that we could get the information so that we can see what percentage of the total filings that happened during this period were these?
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Brooke, yes, we could certainly have those statistics.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Looking at this list, and maybe I just missed it, but is there a way to see on here the distinction between foreign and domestic
Ms. Wheeler.
registrations?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative Olson. Yes, it's not on this particular list, but we certainly do have that information. Okay, let me refer to Director James.
Ms. James.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Kelly James, Secretary of State's office. Representative, I did run these numbers, and we did have that come out on the report. There was very few that were foreign. There maybe were 3 or 4. but we did not add that.
Ms. Long.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Debbie, is there anything unique about the registration process that you picked up from these companies? Are more of them registering digitally than in the past, or is there any trend that you can discern?
Ms. Wheeler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Long, these primarily were done online, and the majority of them were formed by a certain information agency, and that's how they do their businesses, they do file online.
I guess an aspect that I would definitely like to note, and it's a tough deal. Well, it's kind of a good deal too. And this is going to be a wouldn't you agree. But in regards to these formations, I mean, we're going off keywords that we can see or discern, but there's likely the case that there are many of these, or that there are more of these companies that came here because of this that don't have these terms in their name. Now, we only know about these companies that are forming through this certain time, but for instance, No Haven, as an example, is one of those organizations that came to Wyoming because of this legislation. But we don't require companies to say what industry they are in when they form in the state of Wyoming. Is that roughly correct, Ms. Wheeler?
Mr. Chairman, that is absolutely correct. Our statutes, number one, don't require that you have certain terminology within your company name, nor do our statutes require that you list the specific purpose for which you are doing business.
Any further questions in regards to these numbers? Ms. Long, go ahead.
Chairman Lindholm and Deputy Wheeler, do you have any sense for how this might compare to other states that are also going after this registration business, or is there any way to tell whether we're getting an outside share?
Ms. Wheeler?
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Long, we don't have that right now. This is really all new, and we are the only state that's on that account right now. Other states are looking at certain aspects, but we did pass this last session, so I think it's still a little early to tell.
Any further questions? Okay, continue on, Ms. Wheeler.
Mr. Chairman, I think next on your agenda, you wanted to discuss House Bill 70, which would be returning token exemption. And I will return that discussion over to Director James.
Ms. James.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. After House Bill 70 was signed into law, we immediately developed our form that was required by the statute. We put it on our website and with instructions that they email it to us. We have since then received 10 of those forms, and I have sent you a list of those 10. So I'll just briefly go through those, what I know about them to you now. The first one we received was Dahmer's Diner, Cannibal Coin, on March 3rd.
Oh, time out, hang on a sec here. Ms. James, Dahmer's Diner Cannibal Coin?
Mr. Chairman, yes.
Jeffrey Dahmer is
Yeah. Was. Okay, I will come back to that.
And I'll explain it to you right now. They did submit their website to us. We did take a look at it, and it is a cannibal themed food truck based out of Indianapolis.
Good. Imagine second thoughts. So, Ms. James, in regards to their website, is this like a spoof kind of situation? Obviously, because that's pretty illegal.
Mr. Chairman, it's hard to tell. They do have a portion of their website that has a menu. They have a portion of their website that has an explanation of their coin and their ICO project, how they would have the coin in exchange for food. It is still in the development process, so that's about all I can tell you about that one. Like I said, that is out of Indianapolis.
Members, I would remind you that we have some updates to make to House Bill 70, and I expect to handle that from this along.
Mr. Chairman, when I saw this, and we talked about this one earlier, it flagged a problem, which is that we didn't put any fee associated with that notice filing, so that we are susceptible to spam. And I would move. Is it appropriate for me to do that?
Not right now.
Okay.
We'll wait till after this topic.
But maybe when you phrase this as a question, then would you think it would be appropriate for us to put a notice filing a notice fee related to that filing so that we don't end up with spam.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Long, it is a little bit tricky because it is an exemption. So we're saying that it's not a security, but yet they're filing it with us, and now they have to file a fee even though it's not a security. But if that's the policy that this committee decides to go with, it does make sense that it would certainly discourage those to not file.
Thank you.
Let's go on to better ones because they don't look great.
Mr. Chairman, yes, the second one we received was DIN crypto card game. And that one was a local Cheyenne, Wyoming, just a purpose of developing a card game. And we really don't know much about that one either. It does not have a website. The third one was also out of Cheyenne, iBitHub. No website and really no information on that one as well. The Acme coin was another one that was kind of a spoof. Developers were Wile E. Coyote and Road M Runner. And they had an acmegoboom.com website, which is not real. The fifth one ties to the picnic basket coin. It actually goes back to the Jellystone of Estes Park, which is a campground. When you go to their website, they have no mention of an ICO. So I think they put the address, the phone number down. It is all correct that goes to that campground, but there's no mention of any sort of coins on their website. The sixth one was Data Software License Token, and the physical address there is out of San Marcos, Texas. There's no website on that one. R2X was filed by a Wyoming LLC. There's no website yet, but that one they have contacted us and they legitimately want to try. The Node token also, I know that one is a legitimate one that was filed by the Node Haven LLC. And then the form has a mailing address that goes back to one of our commercial registered agents in Cheyenne, but the physical address is out of New York. And they do have a website that shows Israel. So that one definitely is foreign. According to their website, they offer security solutions to protect against cyber crimes. And then the last one, the SyncFab MFG token and smart manufacturing blockchain, they also do have a website, and I believe they are legitimately trying to file this form. So that is our list that we've seen so far. If I could just go on a little bit about what we've also, the questions we've fielded and the emails and things that we've seen. We do get a lot of questions around, please define a developer, please define a facilitator. And those certainly aren't questions that our offices really should be answering. We also get a lot of legal questions, which we don't provide any legal advice around this topic. So the biggest issue we've seen is the intrastate concept to this, that it is a Wyoming law and has no bearing on any federal law or any other state laws. And so we do get the big question of, so once I file this form in Wyoming, then I can just sell these, I can make my offering anywhere. And of course, that's not necessarily the case, and we don't provide any legal advice to anyone. We were also seeing that our office has kind of become a little bit of a help desk, perhaps, for all things blockchain, which is problematic since we are not the experts in that field. Little things from just tell me about it, tell me about the technology, what do I need to know, to I can't get logged in. So at that point, we're certainly not able to help them with those questions. We do get a lot of people that just do seem to have a lot of interest and they want to know more about it. We have referred them to the Blockchain Coalition and other things, but we do also just recommend that they get legal advice before proceeding.
Any questions so far?
It's an observation.
Go ahead, Ms. Long.
It seems as you went through these 10 that they start to get more legitimate as the more near-term ones were filed, which is not a surprise because it takes time for businesses to come up with their business plan, and those early ones that were filed on the first day that it was effective, that the legislation was effective, seemed to be more spam, so to speak. It sounds like this is starting to take starting to become more legitimate as businesses are formed and actually start to file and reach out to you. Would you agree with that general assessment? I know it's way too early and there are only 10 filed, but.
Yeah,
Ms.
Mr.
James.
Chairman, Ms. Long, I would agree that I believe that the Acme coin and the picnic basket coin were filed by the same person. They were not filed by the same email address. They came from different email addresses, but just from the way the form was filled out, I think that they were filed by the same person. So, I mean, I do know that there are a couple that are really actually trying to use this law, but definitely there's a couple that aren't. I mean, we only have 10, like you said. I mean, there are thousands happening out there, and of course they're not filing with us, but we do have these 10 on file.
Yeah, Mr. Kaufman.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Jane, just a quick question about the ones that have filed. And I don't recall what the form looks like, so forgive me if it's on there, but is there any place where these filers notify if they've filed any form of federal registration in conjunction with the state filing, or is that silent?
Ms. James.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Kaufman, no, that is not on the form. That is something that we could consider putting on there that I think would be a good idea. I do know that the, I believe it was the node token. We took a look at their website. It looks like they are considering doing a Regulation D 506C offering. And so that we just happened to find and see on our own, but I do think that that might be something we might want to alter our form to.
Okay, thank you.
And I think, and something just struck me as some folks were looking for the notice of intent, and they had a hard time finding it on your website, just because it is, you got to dig a little bit to find it. So I don't know if there's a possibility of moving that, just passing on what I've heard as being an issue. Any other? Oh, go ahead, Ms.
Sorry,
James.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Yes, I have had a couple of calls where had to walk them through where to find that. So yes, noted. We could definitely move it.
Awesome. Anybody else? No? All right. I think you can continue on. You should be about there. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, regarding House Bill 70, I know this afternoon you wanted to talk about amendments, other things, filing fees. So we can save that for this afternoon if you'd like. I believe you wanted to discuss series LLCs next.
Yeah, go ahead, Ms. James.
I'm actually going to pass it back over to the deputy.
And just as a heads up, so item number 7 this afternoon will go more of a deeper delve into House Bill number 70, the open blockchain token legislation, and kind of take amendments at that point. So at 2:45 this evening. I think we're running a little ahead of time. We're doing good, but right, Chris? All right. Keep whipping.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for allowing us to tag team on these topics. I do appreciate it. So the Series LLC bill that passed goes into effect, as I said earlier, on July 1st. And as we are sitting down with our team looking at implementing the Series LLC and also considering the types of phone calls we are getting, we do have just a few concerns, and we are looking to you for guidance on maybe how to address some of these concerns. We are in the process of doing emergency rules around the Series LLCs. So, for instance, we have received phone calls that you can form the parent LLC and have an unlimited amount of Series LLCs under it. We also have received phone calls where if I form my parent LLC in Wyoming, then my Series LLCs, all of them below it, can go to whatever state they want and offer securities, which we have told them, no, you cannot do that. You have to abide by the security laws in every state. We also have concerns, and we're drawing on our experiences and expertise that we have in the field of business formation fraud. We do worry that if someone were to form a Series LLC and for whatever reason, one of the series underneath were to have a complaint filed against it or were to be used for a nefarious purpose, and we get a call and a complaint, if the name of that series is different in any way from the parent, we won't be able to find it. And so we are wanting to put name parameters around the Series LLC, that Each series must contain a portion of the parent LLC's name in it for tracking purposes, for our office and for the public as well. We also would like to put parameters around that any series formed under the parent cannot be used for the purpose of becoming a commercial registered agent. We have a whole different set of laws and rules around commercial registered agents, and we can see incredible difficulty if, say, 3 or 4 series under a parent were to be formed as a commercial registered agent and the records that they're required to keep. So we're putting certain parameters around that. But we do want to look to the committee for your assistance on just parameters, or as I've heard the term before, sideboards around some of the issues with the series LLCs.
Mr. Chairman?
All right, go ahead, Senator.
On the naming, that's an interesting concept, and I think a lot of that probably just has to do with the structure of the database that you use, and it would take a lot of work to change that. I assume, though, that any of the LLCs that were children of the parent organization could have or file for a doing business as name change. So as long as they had, you're looking for an official name that is somehow linked to the parent so that your search works. But if they actually wanted to do a doing business as and have something entirely different for whatever operational purposes, I assume that's going to be just fine. So they could operate with an independent name for their commercial purposes, but for the internal purposes that you would be able to track. Is that accurate?
Ms. Wheeler?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, that is, and these are things that we've looked at within our business filing system. We have to be able to have a way to track the series to the parent. So if they're going to file and do a DBA, we're going to have to find a way to track that back to the parent. And if that means changing our system, then unfortunately that would be a fiscal impact to our office. And the way our system is set up now, if you form that parent, we already have an existing place that you can list all the series in it. So then if one series was going to pull out and do a DBA, we're going to have to find a way to track that back to the parent for tracking purposes.
Mr. Chairman, follow
Go
up.
ahead, Senator.
I don't know that I'm exactly following. Are you in your database creating new entities for each of the children?
Ms. Wheeler?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, only in the articles. As far as what appears on our database, they're all linked under one record.
Follow up,
Okay.
Senator?
Mr. Chairman, you don't need this for today, but realistically, I think that might end up causing you some headaches in the future, and realistically, it might be better to look at what the cost associated with redoing the database is going to be. So maybe you can bring that to us later, and we can have that discussion. I think you're going to, particularly if you get a large circumstance like the infinite number, that phone call that you had, where that'll cause problems for your database alone, just having infinity present within the DB. It's in the long run probably going to need some reworking. So do you have any sense, have you looked into it, what it would cost to restructure it so that you've got linkages instead of just, I'm filing this underneath this record in my database. Instead, each has a unique identity, but you've basically formulated linkages. At that point, it wouldn't matter what you're calling it because you've got another field in your database, which is providing the relationships instead of just having the naming scheme. Have you looked into that?
Ms. Wheeler?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, we have. I will say we've thought about it, and it would certainly simplify things on our end. And I am happy to sit down with our technology director and our developers and look at what it would cost to make those modifications to our system.
Okay, yeah. Mr. Chairman, I think it would be great to get us that number and help us to understand that.
Yes, please do, Ms. Wheeler. Representative Olson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To dovetail off of Senator Rothfuss's comments, I think if I remember right, and correct me if I'm wrong, doesn't the bill require the filing or the organizer to list in the articles of organization the series?
Ms. Wheeler?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I do believe that is correct.
Okay, and so if that is true, then it seems to me like you would have that record of who the babies are to the parent on your articles of, even if it were 3 or 1,000, your articles of organization would list off those series. Is that correct?
Ms. Wheeler?
Mr. Chairman, Representative. So anything that is put in the articles in paper form or filed electronically has to be then converted into our system. So if the articles have the parent LLC and then the articles of organization list 50 series, we have to convert that into our database so that they are linked and we can track them.
Okay.
Go ahead,
And so,
Representative.
Mr. Chairman, as a follow-up, so what I'm trying to figure out is the naming parameters concern. And so it sounds like the concern was we're not sure if we could line up a baby to a parent if they didn't have matching names or some type of name affiliation. But it sounds to me like your articles of organization will tell you exactly who the babies are. It's just a matter of putting it in your database.
Ms. Wheeler?
So, Mr. Chairman, Representative, I think the best way to explain this. So we're forming a series LLC. In our system, you list the parent LLC. And then currently the way we have it set up as we worked it through the session is in our system right now, there is a box where we can put additional information. And that is where we will list all of the series. So when we go to do a search of a name, the way our system is now, we're only going to be able to pull up that parent LLC. If we do a search of a name and it is a series and it is not tied to the parent, we won't find it in that box that has the other information in it. Does that help?
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead, Representative.
It does help. And so I feel like your question was to the committee, was looking for some guidance on and some input from the committee as you're going down that path on naming parameters. What I would ask the office to do is I would just reiterate what Senator Rothfuss requested, that we see maybe what does that cost to have a system where if we make a change to your electronic filing system so that I think it would be as simple as the checkbox in the beginning that says, am I forming a closed corp? Am I forming an L3? Am I forming a series LLC? Select series LLC. Next page is going to have a specific box that says who is the mother, who are the babies, or something like that. And I would really want to know what that costs, because I know that the bill that we have was modeled after Delaware, which does not have naming requirements. And so that would be my second request from the Secretary of State's office, would be maybe if we could go and look at, and maybe you have, and maybe you can speak to this when I finish talking, but I wonder what we know about Delaware. And from 1996 to now, how do they deal with the naming requirements and the hypothetical you gave us about the lawsuit? I know that when the working group that put this bill together was looking at model legislation, naming requirements was one of the top 5 reasons for selecting Delaware, that there wasn't a requirement that babies and parent share in the name, that there are states that require that, but the working group chose very specifically not to do that. And so it doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it. I just think maybe we ought to look at those two things first. How does Delaware do this? How do they do that for 2 decades without the naming requirement and not have the lawsuit issue, hypothetical issue that you referenced? How do they do that? And then number 2, is there just a simpler fix to our electronic system where we can track these so that and maybe that's what Delaware does. Maybe you could, I don't know if you've looked at Delaware in this issue and you could speak to that.
Deputy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative. No, we have not looked at Delaware, nor have we looked at their system as to what they do. We certainly are happy to do that and reach out to them. I will tell you, here's my only concern right now. We can get you the information. We can get you the bottom line of what it will cost. But this law goes into effect July 1st. And so any modifications that we make won't happen before July 1st. So I guess I would look at the committee for guidance on how we should handle these issues until then.
Ms. Wheeler, can you explain the difference between emergency rules and your standard rules and why the need for emergency rules on this piece of legislation as it stands right now?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. So emergency rules will go into effect about the time the law goes into effect. Your regular rule processing system is a much longer system and a much longer time frame to do it. So if we do rules at the time that the law goes into effect, the comment period going through the various agencies it has to go through takes almost, I believe, 120 days at a minimum.
And just as a quick follow-up, does your office intend, after the emergency rules are in effect, does your office intend to go through the regular rulemaking process also as a final?
Mr. Chairman, we have to.
Okay. Mr. Kaufman.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Wheeler, just a quick question. How will the annual reporting work for these entities? I presume just the parent entity will file an annual report or be required to file an annual report. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Kaufman, yes, it will be one annual report.
Okay, and because I just wanted to clarify that, Mr. Chairman, that might be some discussion that we want to have. I do know, for example, in Delaware, the practice of a lot of attorneys is to file a series LLC with, say, 100 generically named sub-entities that might be changed at a later date. My observation about Delaware's law is they have much more involved annual filing requirements than Wyoming does. Ours are very minimal, and we can maintain a lot more anonymity in those filings than a lot of other entities can. So I'm sympathizing with the Secretary of State's office. I think we need to take a hard look at that, because if we have 100 sub-entities with one annual report being filed, and those entities might have name changes that are potentially not public record in any way, shape, or form, like they are in other entities, that could be a huge problem. Again, I'm thinking with the lawyer brain, how am I going to sue those people? That would be really, really hard. And the other issue we always have is figuring out where the proper jurisdiction to sue these companies are. We have that problem in Wyoming now. Judges are reluctant to allow us to establish jurisdiction over these companies that have really no nexus other than their parent is Wyoming. So I'm guessing if you have any other ideas, but I'm thinking we should look at figuring out at least a way to require those entities to report at minimum name changes and where they are.
Ms. Wheeler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Kaufman. We absolutely are happy to look at that. And, you know, if we're going to look at bringing you modifications to our system to address issues, I think that we will bring forward other things. As we're talking, I'm thinking of other things. Every series is represented by the same registered agent as the parent. So we have to be able to tie those series back to that registered agent as well. So we will sit down with our team and we will all work through this and go through the suggestions that you have made today, and we will bring you back something at the next meeting.
Mr. Chairman?
I had Ms. Long first, sorry, Senator.
And Mr. Chairman and Deputy Wheeler, is there something that you can do in the interim to encourage the outcome that you would like, in the sense that a lot of these businesses are not looking for anonymity? Some of them are, but the fact that they wouldn't be searchable for an outsider on your database means that it's not even just the legal issue. They wouldn't be able to get a bank account because it wouldn't be able to verify that they were validly formed because the bank can't find them on your website. So there are some interesting sort of carrot approaches that may be helpful in the registration process that I'm wondering may be helpful for you to disclose when you do take the filings of a series LLC, that if they do not include the parent in the name of the children, that they won't be searchable, and that has implications for them as operating businesses in terms of their own contracting and their own financial services relationships. Would that be sufficient?
Ms. Wheeler.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Long, we are more than happy to put information on our website and the portal for which someone would file online. Absolutely. We're happy to do that.
Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, my concern with this discussion is that we're going to shape the policy of our blockchain, or our LLC, I should say, a series LLC registrations based on the current confirmation of a database, where the selections that went into forming that database happened at a time when there was no Series LLC. And that's due to financial constraints. And honestly, that's really bad policy. That's not how we should be doing it. I understand absolutely the interests of the office and the deputy of trying to do that because we don't have resources directed to this. But we need to be thinking about what is the best policy. What should this look like? How should we be doing it? That's the most advantageous then for business and the state in regulating those businesses. And I don't think we're there. I think we're a ways from that concept. So if, one of the things perhaps we should look at in our revisions to 70, not 70, excuse me, to
126.
to 126 is just this, coming up with, do we want these series LLCs, the children to actually be their own entity? And I think we do in some way in the database. It needs to be queryable. Somebody should be able to come up with the name of whatever the child organization is, hear about it for whatever reason they heard about it, go to the Secretary of State's office, type that name in alone, and then find out this is a child organization to this parent organization. This is the related filing information. It goes to what Matt was talking about with regard to knowing when names change. And if it's an entity in the database, that name change will have to be filed for. And then you can do DBAs. I understand now a lot better what you were saying about DBAs. You can't really do that the way that you structured it in your database. What would that mean? But it should mean something. You should be able to have a child LLC with a DBA that's meaningful in the database. So we really do have to find a way to bring some resources so that we can restructure the database and have it operate the way we want it to. If the intent of the legislation was to provide for the opportunity to have whatever name you want so that we weren't following the Delaware, then we should hold to that and not go with the limitations of a database. So that just gets back to let's figure out what this costs, and maybe we can go talk with the governor's office, find some other endow funds, figure something out to get this done so that we don't have to hold back the Secretary of State's office with the emergency rules.
I think that's a good point, Senator. It's fortunate we've got an appropriations committee member around.
Wallet.
I think he's around. Deputy Wheeler, you want to go after that one?
Mr. Chairman and Senator, I do really appreciate that. And for people that aren't familiar with our office and our business system, we have a very, it's a customized business system that was developed to our statutes. So everything that's entered into our system is tied to statutes, and it does its own checks on the name availability, registered agent availability. We've put in fraud aspects. We have certain addresses that registered agents can't use that we've tied in there as well. So if we're going to make these changes, we have to make sure that they are tied to the statute. And we are more than happy to work on changing our system, of course, if we have the appropriation to do so. But because it is such a customized system, it will cost money. Now, the other thing that we have to think about is every time we make a change, we have to look at other variables that will affect it. Dissolutions, reinstatements. We have to be able to provide for all of those as well. But we are happy to do that. I'm happy to sit down with our technology director and our developer. I will tell you that right now, because we are in an election year, once we start rocking and rolling in August and November, our technology division is completely consumed with the election. So we will get information to you at the next meeting and be ready to have a discussion with you. I welcome any and all ideas that you may have as well.
Just long.
I have a question for Deputy Wheeler, if I may. Is there some role that the commercial registered agent can play in maintaining that information, especially in the interim? My understanding is that Wyoming commercial registered agent law requires a commercial registered agent if they're registering a certain number of entities, which probably most series LLCs would fall into, and the commercial registered agent, not an expert in this, but has to itself keep more information than is shared with the Secretary of State's office. So I wonder if a different angle maybe in the interim, maybe permanently, is to have the secretary of, or to have the commercial registered agent keep that information, that additional information.
Deputy?
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Long, the registered agent statutes that we have in place, if you are a registered agent and you represent 10 or more entities, you are then defined as a commercial registered agent. You must register with our office. By statute, the commercial registered agent is required to keep what I call the key player information, officers, directors, members, managers, and a communications contact. That is what they are required by statute to keep right now.
May I follow up?
Go ahead, Ms. Long.
So for the Series LLC, I wonder if amending that statute for them to require to keep an accurate, up-to-date list, that's what a commercial registered agent does, right? Is keep lists of and contact information for receiving service of process in litigation. That the commercial registered agent may very well actually have a big role to play on this very point.
Deputy?
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Long, and it was our understanding from the beginning under this bill that the parent LLC, the registered agent for the parent LLC, is responsible for maintaining the information on every Series LLC under it.
Thanks, Rob. Mr. Pope?
Mr. Chairman, Deputy Wheeler, so that goes, the commercial registered agent question, keeping that information, that goes to the question, when does a child legally drop from the parent?
Did you have more? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead with that.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Pope, I am not sure what you are referencing.
Right now, the parent is registered with all of its subsidiary child entities. When are those child entities no longer part of that series? Is it when the parent is no longer the 100% owner, a majority owner, or own any part of that? I don't believe the legislation speaks to that, and I'm wondering if you considered that, because that is also something a commercial registered agent would need to know, is how to determine whether that child LLC is legally dropped and needs then its own registration.
Deputy?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Pope, that is certainly a legal question that I could not even begin to answer right now. I'm sorry, I do not know the answer to that.
And Mr. Chairman,
go ahead.
As a comment, I believe we probably need to address that issue at some point, because if a subsidiary LLC to that parent is sold, then to a third party, we need a means of making certain it's no longer considered part of the parent.
I guess, just as an aside, I might disagree with that point, but I love a good task force fight. So,
Mr. Chairman?
Hey, go ahead, Senator.
I'd just be curious on that. It's an interesting topic. We did model this after Delaware's, and clearly they've had some time where they've been working on it. So there's got to be a standard practice there for how subsidiaries, the children can be treated if they can be spun off into their own corporation, what it takes to do that. So maybe we just need to look to guidance from how it's been done in the past. I'd ask staff, Chris, if he could look into that for the next meeting, perhaps.
Mr. Land?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I was dealing with.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Senator.
Yeah, just discussing this concept of you've got a child entity in a Series LLC. Under what circumstances can you remove that entity, separate it out as its own legal entity? How would that work? And how has it worked in Delaware where they've utilized this in the past? So a better understanding of handling those subsidiaries.
Well, I would also add to that, or if needed, to become a separate entity. Mr. Kaufman.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I was just going to address that question because I do know how they do it in Delaware. If a subsidiary entity leaves, it's required to reform and reorganize as its own entity, unless it opts into, our statutory structure has merger, consolidation, those types of provisions that could apply. So unless it's a merger consolidation in which you're always filing articles of merger or consolidation anyways, it's required to register. And so that does bring up a good point of something we should probably look at is making sure that if an entity does leave through sale, merger, acquisition, whatever the case might be, that it's required to file something to make sure that it gets out from under the parent.
And Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Senator.
The other point that David was talking about was what happens if if I've got a couple of different companies, one of them owns 45% of the child, the other one owns 55%. Is that something we could do legally? And maybe Mr. Coffin knows that one.
Mr. Coffin? So I'm not sure I fully understood that question.
Senator.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The possibility of partial ownership of the children of a series LLC. So you've got joint parentship or something, joint custody perhaps, where you've got two different corporations, each with an ownership stake in a child LLC.
So, and you don't have to exactly answer that, Mr. Kaufman, because we're gonna get into task force discussion. I don't want to waste or keep the Secretary of State up here any longer. So just remember where you're at on that one, Mr. Pope. Question for the Secretary of State.
Just one follow-up, and that is the question of whether there should be a legal trigger that requires that child to be dropped from the parent, and that's.
Deputy.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Pope, that would be at the prerogative of the task force.
Okay. Deputy, do you have anything else in regards to House Bill 126, the Series LLC?
Mr. Chairman, the only other thing that I would bring up, and we are doing research on this, I have seen advertised on the internet that some commercial registered agents will convert an entity to a Series LLC. We are looking to see if we already have the statutory framework in place or if we need new statutes that allow that to happen. I'm not sure right now. We just saw it at the 11th hour, so we are certainly looking at it, and maybe Representative Olson would know. I'm not sure.
Any further comments or questions for the deputy? Seeing none. Thank you very much. Folks, we're going to go into public comment now. So public comment on the topics of specifically what we started out with the Secretary of State's office. So we're looking at corporate entity and the notice of intent filings for House Bill 70 and House Bill 126 Series LLC. So any public comment, sir, if you'd like to come forward and just state your name for the record and take a seat, sir.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead, Ms. Long.
May I just, while Chris is having a seat here, just give everyone in the room and watching the live stream a little bit of background. We have a legend in the internet sitting at this table right here, and he came to Laramie because of the blockchain bills, and we're about to hear from the gentleman who built the secure sockets layer of the internet and TLS, transport layer security. Everybody who interacts with the internet has interacted with his work. So thank you for coming today.
Thank you, Mr. Allen.
Mr. Chairman, task force members, I'm a technologist. I don't come from the law side of the community, but I am very involved in international standards activities and also a variety of initiatives involved with not only blockchain technology, but security technology in a variety of ways. In particular, with the two statutes that you have talked about, also the issues of the Department of State being able to handle these changes and such. I do believe that it is possible for the registered agents to be able to do more, to do what are known in the community as verifiable claims, verifiable credentials around the different parties that they represent, that these proofs can be presented to the Department of State, who can then verify, yes, they are complete, they are integral, they have all of the associated things that we need should we at some later point need to take various actions. And these things do not necessarily require as much effort of the Department of State as they do for the individual registered agents to create these claims. They're data documents, they're signed using relatively well-known technology that is currently being recommended by Homeland Security, British Columbia, a number of European governments, et cetera. So this is definitely possible. You can do it in a more decentralized fashion, allow a lot of the work and the effort to be done by your registered agents rather than by the demanding it all from the State Department.
Any questions so far from Mr. Allen? Ms. Long?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Allen, could you explain a little bit more about what a verifiable claim is and talk a little bit about how the Secretary of State would integrate with a registered agent if the state were to change the registered agent law to require the registered agents to provide that service?
Right. So
Mr. Allen.
The W3C, the official name is World Wide Web Consortium, is the standards body that addresses sort of application level standards. These are browsers, these are wallets, all the kinds of things that you interact with when you're doing technology today. There is a subgroup there called the Credentials Community Group, which has chartered something called the Verifiable Claims Working Group. I have sent an email to the task force with details on a PowerPoint presentation and a quick intro on this. The verifiable claim is basically a data object that is signed by various parties, and it can be a fairly complex document with multiple signatures in it, that basically says that party X says, makes a statement and signs that particular statement. And it can be done in a very structured fashion such that technology tools can go in and validate, was the structure correct? i.e., do you have something in here that is new or different or doesn't fit into the framework, and who it is that said that, so you know specifically who was doing that. So that's the verifiable claim. The decentralized identifiers technology is a blockchain agnostic way of doing identity and signatures that allows for you to future-proof yourself against one company's method or one particular technology that works today, whereas 2 years from now you may want to switch to something new. So that's the decentralized identifiers technology. That help? Okay.
Well, Ms. Long,
Mr.
any
Chairman,
follow-up?
Yes, may I follow up? In a perfect world, if we were to use technology to solve this problem, what would it look like, and what kind of burden would it place on the Secretary of State? We're trying to figure out what a fiscal impact there would be on the state of providing upgraded technology.
So the registered agent on behalf of the company would collect basically simple verifiable claims from the officers of the company, the stockholders, whatever the appropriate legal requirements are to there. Those claims can be in the form of proofs, which are things like, I have a legal identity and Wells Fargo knows it, but I'm not going to actually give you my full legal identity. I'm not going to give you my birth weight and all the other different types of things, but that information is available if need be. The registered agent collates this all into a document, signs it as the registered agent, the collated profile of that company, and then submits it to the Secretary of State, who basically evaluates it and goes, this meets the criteria of our regulations. And then when they can basically at that point sign that presentation and add their own verifiable claim that basically says, we have basically approved it, and here is the charter number or whatever other information they wish to add or annotate to this document, which is then sent back to the registered agent, which is sent back to the stockholders or founders of the organization, which they in turn could maybe go to a Wyoming bank or somebody else who supports these documents as a proof that the organization was properly chartered, that all of the different regulations and approvals are there, all the while preserving privacy, but also preserving responsibility, that if you need the ability for, to whatever your laws are in regards to being able to hold somebody accountable for the actions of that organization, you can meet that accountability without violating privacy.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah,
may I
go ahead,
follow
Ms.
up?
Vaughn.
How expensive would it be for the various parties to build something like this? It sounds like they have to integrate, so that's an integration right there, but.
Well, first off, this is an international standard, so there are over 81 companies, several government agencies, et cetera, that are already creating this technology now. Specifically of interest to you is two of them, one of which is British Columbia, who has already created a DID-based corp book for the corporations in British Columbia. So you can basically see the status of various companies and their records in British Columbia on a website. They're all signed by the IT department of British Columbia. This is, this was demonstrated, the pilot was demonstrated a month ago. You might be able to leverage some of that technology. It's open source. Similarly, Homeland Security has been offering a number of grants. So far, $2 million have been granted toward different companies to implement various open source projects to move these agendas forward. You may be able to leverage some of that work. So yes, there will be money required. You may be able to license software from a number of different parties to support this type of stuff. You may be able to contribute to the open source yourself for your specific needs. There's a lot of different ways to make this less expensive and distribute the cost more fairly. Because Blockchain Commons is an organization that I'm trying to form right now, and there's some specific reasons why I'd like to maybe do this as a LLC in Wyoming. There is a benefit to me to being in Wyoming's jurisdiction as opposed to some other jurisdiction. If there is a benefit there, I don't mind paying a little bit more for that benefit. So why don't let me bear some of the burden of the cost, which means that goes to my registered agent. My registered agent is getting some new capabilities. Let's have them bear some of the burden of the cost, and let's try to keep it fair to everybody.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, go ahead, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm trying to think through some of the ways this would happen if we offloaded responsibility on the registered agent. I think the thing that we still have to have the capability of at the state level is the state's the front door if somebody has concerns about a corporation. That they want to be able to go to the state, they want to be able to do the search, and they want to be able to come up with whatever entity it is and interact with the Secretary of State. So even if we offload some responsibility on the registered agents, we still have to have the capacity for the Secretary of State to know all of the children organizations of a Series LLC. Do you see any easy remedy to that we're missing, that maybe the ideas that you're providing us with could help?
Mr. Allen.
Yes, so remember that keys don't necessarily have to be exclusively the province of individuals.
Right.
They can also be the provinces of groups. There's things called multi-signatures. So you could, in effect, have the corporation give a subsidiary claim that says, here is my series, okay? And I am basically attesting I have, this, series A, B, C, D, and what the different things are of that. So they can make claims to that extent that they can present to you, and you can go, yes, 100% of it's covered, or wait a second, there is something missing here. We're not accepting this. We're not going to countersign this until we have more information. We also have to recognize things are emerging. Like all of you have been familiar with the changes in the last few years because of KYC, that's know your customer rules in banking, AML, anti-money laundering, and such. And these have become honeypots for private data that a lot of countries are very worried about. There's Equifax breaks and things of that nature. So a lot of what is emerging is to have fewer places where this private information is. So for instance, I don't know who your primary banker is. My primary banker is Wells Fargo. I can basically present my personal information, my KYC, what kind of business I'm doing to them. They can basically provide me a pseudo-anonymous credential that basically says this party with this, random number, digit identifier, has properly registered KYC. And if at any point you need to contact with me about this particular party, you can do so. But I as the person with this verifiable credit proof will give is just the proof that I have KYC and that a party you trust, Wells Fargo, is accountable for that information without actually giving you all of that information. So this is emerging. I mean, it's probably going to take a couple of years for all of this to shake out in the industry, but that's the direction the world is going. We do not want you to have to do KYC in the United States and do another KYC in Hong Kong and do another KYC in Europe and do all of these different places where every single one is a potential place where your privacy or your confidentiality, business confidentiality, could be violated.
Seeing no further questions, Mr. Allen, thank you very much. And I hope you stick around because we're going to be going over a lot more topics. And
thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Anybody else like to go ahead and come up? And state your name and if you're with a company for the record, please.
Mr. Chairman, distinguished appointees, my name
in the mic, please. Sorry.
My name is Arthur Vanguard. I am with Fu7 Corporation. My company is developing technologies in the field of delivery of digital entertainment, e-commerce of digital content and digital products, as well as working on different blockchain technologies. One of the alarming things that I see as of now from this discussion, that there's a trend to adopt more bureaucracy. Since we are dealing with blockchain, a lot of those things can be offloaded and solved through blockchain. And we agree with Ms. Long with the comment to offload as much as can be offloaded from the state to the level of registered agents. And we have an idea and are working on technology to automate agents and make them on blockchain.
So we would like to see the creation.
I'm going to stop you real quick. Can you say your name real quick?
Yeah, sure.
Thanks.
My name's Heath Beaudry, and I'm also an advisor for Fu7 out of Evanston, Wyoming.
Thank you.
So we would like to see the creation of a blockchain virtual agent. So currently, right now, companies pay anywhere from $100 to several $100s to hire a registered agent who represents the company in the state of Wyoming, and be a representative for the creation of the company in the state of Wyoming. The state already has automated filing of corporate reports through its online portal, so incorporating blockchain as a method of service seems to me would be a natural, logical extension. So if you allow foreign corporations to incorporate in the state of Wyoming entirely using blockchain virtual agents, the state could collect revenue for blockchain corporate agent services. The state could possibly save money on postage and labor when servicing those corporate entities. And the immutability, most importantly, of blockchain would serve as a reliable, secure, and self-documenting platform, reducing paperwork. Under the new blockchain virtual agent system, existing and new companies would have an option to either use the existing registered agents, as we have today, or switch to blockchain and use the blockchain virtual agent system, but not both. If a company elects to receive its notices on the blockchain via virtual agent, then it would be the company's responsibility to regularly check the blockchain for any filings. And alternatively, as software could be developed to automatically perform monitoring of blockchain for any changes. Thank you.
Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Beaudry, thank you. This is a new concept for me, the blockchain virtual agent. Can you help me understand if you know, I suppose, states or nation states that have explored this or are using this?
Maybe
Mr. Beaudry.
I can answer this question, Mr. Chairman.
Art?
Mr. Olson, yes, there are states not using similar technology. They are not using blockchain per se, but little post-communist country of Estonia automated blockchain company registration entirely online. You don't have to appear in the state, and they solved it in the following way. If you want to conduct business in Estonia, in regards to blockchain, you have to obtain something which is called e-residency. E-residency is a electronic identity, and state of Estonia requires first that you have to identify yourself, so you have to provide copy of your passport, some other documents to identify your identity. When the state of Estonia identifies your identity, then they will issue you a digital card, cryptographically secured, and this digital card serves as your e-residency card as well as your cryptographic signature that you use for submitting documents to the state. And then all the filings from the state and to the state are done using electronically, and every filing that requires personal signature or signature of the agent of the company is done with the use of this electronic ID. Actually, in the state of Estonia, all residents have electronic IDs that they can conduct business using this method. Actually, entire Eastern European bloc is moving in this direction. Additionally, use of this electronic residency allows for conducting banking transactions online and opening bank accounts remotely without being present in the state of Estonia. I would say they are probably 10 years ahead of the United States, which is shocking considering that they are post-communist country. And I would like to suggest that state of Wyoming moves in this direction.
Any further questions? Seeing none. Thank you, gentlemen. Really appreciate it. Mr. Jennings.
Just 1 minute. Somebody left their glasses, sir. My name is Rob Jennings, Mr. Chairman, with the Wyoming Blockchain Coalition. And I would just like to add to his point, to Mr. Allen's point, what got me excited about the Blockchain Coalition in the first place. I've worked with Dave Pope for years with my LLCs, and I've learned tried and true methods of operating LLCs, mostly through error. Dave can, my own error, mostly. But, you know, we've kind of developed a system over time, and Rich Slater has been my attorney, and we've developed what's a good, I think, sort of checks and balances systems on how payments are made through the LLC, all these different things. And I would say that my initial, the reason I got like a Dave Pope and Rich Slater, other people involved in this, because I saw what the blockchain could do for the LLC in Wyoming. So to that gentleman's point, to Mr. Allen's point, and to others, I do think a lot of this technology could be the cost could be borne by the registered agents. And I'd be willing to do that myself. We did set up a blockchain registered agent company here in Wyoming, commercial. Now, I'm not pushing for an e-resident because I still believe you need a physical office and person in Wyoming to be served or whatever. I still like that. But there's a lot of these things, even on the Series LLC, I believe could be solved through blockchain solutions with physical IDs and that kind of stuff. So my point here is what we would like is to open a conversation with the Secretary of State's office about a simple API where perhaps working with them we could, because as it goes today, if somebody sends something to a registered agent, then that registered agent has to go manually type it in the computer. The form asks for the same information 3 or 4 times across when you're filling it out, or they print out documents and take them. That seems to me like here we are with the blockchain task force. We got a hamster wheel kind of backdoor scenario. So some of this stuff I do believe could be done by the registered agents if properly incentivized to go out and market the LLCs of Wyoming, much like Delaware does. So I would love to see the Secretary of State's office work with whomever to help just bridge that gap if we could, number one. And then secondly, I do believe Montana has the Series LLC. So they might be an easy state to talk to about how they're handling that. There's 14 or 15 of them. But really, I think the registered agents could do a lot more, or they could spend a lot more time and money on some of this stuff and then work with the Secretary of State's office just to integrate. So that would be my point. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Jennings? Seeing none, thank you. I'm going to move to Treasurer Gordon. Did you want to testify on this specific portion, or?
I sure can.
Yeah, that'd be great, Treasurer. I should have called you up first. You're the highest ranking official in the room by far. So, and just a reminder to everybody, this is the Treasurer of the state of Wyoming, Mark Gordon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. It's an honor to be here today, and I want to commend you on the work you have done in bringing this important concept forward. And it's fascinating testimony, so I didn't mind waiting around to learn. I also want to commend the Secretary of State's office for the role they're taking in trying to advance this concept. And I think it's interesting and remarkable that Wyoming is really talking about this in a sense of, let's try to keep the bureaucracy out of it. Let's try to figure out how to decentralize this. Mr. Chairman, I wanted to speak specifically to House Bill 70 and remind you, and you already know this because you're the leaders who brought this forward, about what a unique opportunity this brings to Wyoming. As you know, it's the first in the nation, and it's driving companies to our state. I realize that not only in the blockchain environment, but in the financial market, marketplace as well, there has been an uptick of registration of trust companies and other things in the state of Wyoming. So Wyoming truly is becoming not only national, but perhaps an international leader as well. And so I commend your work and the work of the Secretary of State's office in doing this. I also want to mention just briefly that it is exciting that we have been able to extricate ourselves from the federal government and exert our state's authority in regulating this. It's the appropriate thing we should do under the 10th Amendment. And so congrats to you for doing that. And I want to say that, the testimony we've heard today from Mr. Allen and others really speaks to the rich environment that Wyoming is open for business development. My office, and I think Ms. Long, we have talked, as have Mr. Jennings, have talked broadly about the possibility of startup weekends, startup weeks here that can do much to advance Wyoming's leadership in this framework, so perhaps solve some of the problems we're talking about today. It is just a really exciting time, in my view, across the nation and across the world, that we are exploring alternative settlement mechanisms. And when we see the vulnerabilities that we heard about today in the traditional banking systems and other things that are continually a possibility, having other simpler forms of settlement really talks about the future in a way that Wyoming, I'm proud, will be able to lead. The last thing I want to say, and I only say this, Chairman Lindholm and Chairman Driskill, because, I think in this whole vein of blockchain, cryptocurrencies, and so on, I want to commend the bill specifically for commenting on this is not an investment for cryptocurrencies. And I just to reassure the people of Wyoming, as treasurer, and we heard this testimony a little bit earlier today, this is an area that's very new, and a lot of things have got to be worked out. We have taken a very prudent. This is a
it keeps sliding. I'm actually enjoying watching it, Treasurer.
Yeah. I think it's a way to sort of make sure that I don't talk for very long.
Driskill has the button back here. We're going to cut you off.
But thank you. I just want to assure the people of Wyoming that we are very much engaged in blockchain. It is part of the whole financial system coming forward with a host of variety of opportunities that are presented all across the spectrum, from finance to obviously Senator Driskill, ag products and other things that can be applied. With regard to cryptocurrencies, I think we heard from the 10 initial offerings, there's a lot of speculation and the possibility of that. And the Treasurer's Office takes a very prudent view And so at this time, we are not looking at any kind of investments. And I do note that SF70 doesn't talk about these as potential investments. It talks about it as a means of settlement. So with that, just want to thank you again for your leadership in this. It's an exciting time for Wyoming. It has been fun to be able to be at national and international conferences and talk about Wyoming's leadership. And it's also been possible to try to start to recruit companies to come to Wyoming. So I look forward to working with you in the future. And thank you very much for this opportunity, Mr. Chairman.
Well, Mr. Treasurer, you're too far to high five right now, but I appreciate your testimony. Is there any questions for Treasurer Gordon? All right, I'll do it. Mr. Treasurer, so absolutely, digital currencies are a very volatile market, and you as a treasurer are tasked with the role of investing the state's corpus essentially and bringing that investment return home. And I think it was last year, we went in this last session seeing roughly all funds considered together, roughly $1 billion returned in capital. And that's a tremendous amount of money. And I personally look at that return as one of the aspects on why we didn't raise taxes this last go around, is because we did have that investment return that really helped offset those aspects. Do you foresee a time, and I guess you don't have to answer this if you don't want, it's kind of a, but I can't be the only one that's interested in knowing. Do you foresee a time when perhaps a digital currency or multiple digital currencies, virtual currencies, however you want to call them, do not or step away from being such a volatile market with ups and downs where the state of Wyoming could possibly invest?
So, Mr. Chairman, speculating on the future, let me just, and thank you for your kind words. And I will say that as treasurer, I think it's incredibly important that the state's portfolio perform without a tremendous amount of volatility. That's why we've been so prudent. That's why we've been so cautious. And I note that the legislature has taken some steps to allow us to take a little bit more risk in the portfolio, but with an understanding that the legislature has of what that risk might mean in terms of drawdown. So I commend obviously the legislature and my fellow slip board members in sort of making those changes. Your question went to whether cryptocurrencies might eventually become less volatile, and I do believe that yes, they will. You know, currently right now, some things like Ethereum really have a practical purpose well outside of just sort of a Bitcoin offering or an ICO, and so as these currencies become more fluent and as that marketplace evolves, I do see that there will be some stability that will come into play. So. Thank you very much for the question.
Ms. Long.
Mr. Chairman, may I follow up? Treasurer Gordon, have you given any thought to putting some degree of flexibility in the investment guidelines, or specifically talking to the custodians that the states use about their plans for custodying these assets, so that if your investment managers choose to purchase them, that they would be able to? And what I'm specifically thinking about is, for example, the Telegram initial coin offering was a $1.7 billion offering that had a lot of venture capital funds invested, and very well, for all I know, the state could be invested in those venture capital funds, right? So indirectly, there are a lot of institutional investors like the state of Wyoming that are already indirectly exposed because so many big name venture capital funds have invested in these. But the question of how the assets will be custodied, because they're held outside of the traditional custodian relationships, they're custodied directly on a blockchain. That's a place where I foresee a need for leadership, and I'm curious if you've given that any thought, especially coming from the state that's taken so much leadership, just to start getting the state's custodians ready to custody these assets.
Mr. Treasurer.
Mr. Chairman, Committee Member Long, we have spent a lot of time looking at blockchain and its application with our custody banks. Of course, the custody arrangements are sort of dealt with by that, but as you know, many of the challenges that we're seeing sort of in the security marketplace can be remedied in large fashion by blockchain, and banks are everywhere looking at that opportunity. So in that frame of reference, yes. When we speak about our private equity holdings, we have the ability to review all of those, and I can tell you that we have not invested in anything that is related to any kind of cryptocurrencies at this point. That's not saying that we won't, but it's not part of our investment guideline, and probably is worth a conversation, and we do that on an annual basis now in public. So every March, we invite legislatures and the public at large to come and set the asset allocation. Many of you have taken that opportunity, and it would be a great part of that conversation next year. After this committee has done so much good work, and we can give you the high five you've looked for, yes, absolutely, welcome it.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Just to add some numbers, I looked at this. Mr. Chairman, the ICO market was $6.3 billion in the first quarter. That was 40% of the size of the traditional initial public offering market in the traditional stocks.
That's correct.
And 30% of the size of the venture capital market. So it is now so large. And what's interesting is so few institutions are part of it. Lots of conversations are happening in the institutional asset community about what the heck the institutions are going to do with this asset class that is now too big to ignore. So I commend you for having those conversations and thinking about it.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Treasurer Gordon? No, I guess on a parting note, Mr. Treasurer, I can't imagine too many state treasurers can drop a term like Ethereum knowledgeably. So I commend you. I commend you for that.
He had it written on the back of his.
Ethereum. Staff says Ethereum.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Treasurer.
Thank you for your work.
Mr. Chairman.
Is custody question, digital asset custody on the agenda?
Yes, sir. Mr. Allen, it is. Yep. A little bit later on, and that will actually touch on Senate File 111, who Co-Chairman Driskill sponsored. So we'll go into it then. Thank you, Mr. Treasurer.
Thank you.
Any other public testimony? Sir, come down and state your name for the record.
Tony Rose.
In the mic. Sorry. I'm ornery about it because we're streaming and for the record.
Okay. Yeah, my name is Tony Rose. I'm an entrepreneur and product builder from California. I've been following the Wyoming process of blockchain for since I heard about it in January, and it's very encouraging. So I commend the panel and the council on the good work. I just wanted to comment on what I heard from the Secretary of State's office and their database, and kind of what Chris spoke about and what the gentleman over here spoke about, just the technical implementations. I've been building software for 20 years, and you really, I get where the Secretary of State's coming from, not wanting to, take on too much and, not break things. But it sounds like it is a fairly simple matter of the series LLCs being able to have those be searchable. And right now the database just doesn't have the right field for that. But I think that kind of gets into how do you manage those as a business, right? If you want to add new ones or change the state of new ones, there really needs to be an API to talk to the Secretary of State's system, so that every time you add a series or subtract a series, or you need to make one go out of good standing, or whatever the change may be, if you have to submit a piece of paper, or someone's got a swivel chair between their registered agent to the Secretary of State system, that's just not going to scale in the way that I think the law intends. So I just want to echo what Rob said about the need for an API. But then it goes one step beyond that, because once you can API that call and the Secretary of State can return the articles of incorporation, you can then allow and enable the registered agents to take on the first pass of implementing the new technology, not necessarily putting it in the Secretary of State's domain or responsibility. So let the private sector take care of that. In my read of HB 101, that's something that a registered agent could do. They could build that today, but they do need to have an electronic sort of process with the Secretary of State's office so that they can receive those documents digitally, create the claim as Mr. Allen was speaking to. So empower the registered agent to write a digital claim that, yes, I did receive this document from the Secretary of State. I have the power as a legal authority to make that legal claim, and then write that to a blockchain. And then you have sort of the beginnings of that blockchain-based corporate governance system that doesn't require the Secretary of State to make a big investment. The private sector can kick that off.
Any questions for Mr. Rose? Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Before we have the next person or public comment come up, I would like to recognize that Representative Charles Pelkey just came in. This is his hometown, so welcome, Representative Pelkey. Thank you for joining us. Any other public testimony? Come on down and state your name again for the record.
Arthur Vanguard, Fu7 Corporation. I second the statement by this gentleman about developing API. By the way, API is application programming interface for those who don't know that. Once the API is developed, this would open a lot of opportunities for cooperation between state and private industry. A lot of software development can be financed by private entities as long as the state of Wyoming would be willing to share some of the revenues from the proceeds. For example, if corporate filing fees would be automated by a private entity, and let's say state of Wyoming would be charging $100 for the filing, if portion of this revenue could be shared with a private company, I am sure there would be a range of private companies that would develop this application and software for free for the state of Wyoming, hoping for the share of the revenues. And this could be a very, very effective way to finance this technology. The same applies to blockchain. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Vanguard? No? Thank you, sir.
Pardon? It's pretty novel.
Yeah. So any other public testimony? Seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and close public discussion at this time. And task force members, so this is our first workover essentially. So at this time, we're going to discuss what we just heard, but more importantly, if bill drafts are going to come forward, this would be the time to move them. So who wants to take the first step?
Mr. Chairman, is it appropriate? Thank you. Is it appropriate for me to move that or to recommend, or I guess I would move to recommend that the Legislative Service Office add a filing fee to the notice requirement for House Bill 70 so that we don't have spam non-serious filers. It doesn't have to be a large number, but it does appear that we do have some issues with non-serious filers, and they're wasting the Secretary of State's time. So putting some sort of a filing fee would seem to make sense.
Before I get a second, I want to mention that I would like to, if it's all right with you, Ms. Long, I would like to push that to item number 7 at 2:45 because we'll be doing all the amendments on 70 at that time. Is that acceptable?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
thank you, Ms. Long. So no second. That one fails for a lack of a second. Any so in regards to the rules being adopted, those types of things, the Series LLC, is there any motions to kind of help along with some of the situations we heard from the Secretary of State's office?
Mr. Chairman, I'm just going to recommend, there's been a lot of conversation about registered agents. I work with registered agents often, and while many of them are very sophisticated, a lot of them are incredibly unsophisticated. And so I love a lot of the conversation and where it's going in ways that we might be able to automate and put more obligations onto those registered agents. I would be remiss to say, though, I think our statute even comes close to contemplating putting those additional types of obligations and duties onto registered agents. So I just think it's something we should look at very closely in terms of not so much the legislation that's on our plate for this session, but looking more closely at the registered agent statutes.
Is that a motion for LSO to study, or?
I don't know, Mr. Chairman. I'll leave that to you. I'm making the recommendation that I think we should take a deeper dive at those.
I think Representative Olson's going to alley-oop you here.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, in listening to the public comment and in listening to the discussion with the Secretary of State's office, chiefly the naming requirement, I think is a concern that we can tackle potentially inside of a legislation that provides more responsibilities for registered agents. And so simplistically, it would be a statutory requirement that the commercial agent simply keep the names of the babies inside of a series, just like they keep directors and officers and phone numbers and addresses for them. But I think in a more holistic approach would be what Mr. Kaufman is suggesting, that we ask LSO to look at maybe a comprehensive bill that would address our registered agent statutes as a whole. You know, and in particular, what I'm thinking of is the commercial agent status kicks in at 10, and maybe we don't want to monkey too much with that, but you know, maybe most of our series are going to be over 10 that we're going to be dealing with, and how hard is it to keep track of something under 10? But also some of the other comments that we've heard today, I think if LSO could look at just a holistic approach to a piece of legislation that we could be considering over the interim. And I move that.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Mr. Kaufman. Any discussion on that idea? Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I don't know that we have a clear enough directive for LSO at this point. I wouldn't want to go back with what we just asked for. And I'm not saying that the idea isn't a good one. I like everything we've heard so far, but we need to structure it, know what we're asking, and honestly hear more and try and formulate and work through how this would operate, perhaps with the Secretary of State. So we can leave it a vague motion and basically say we would like to work on this and try and draft some legislation in cooperation with Secretary of State's office and others to explore. But I don't know that I can just support a conclusive, yeah, let's get the legislation drafted. I wouldn't want to give them the task and walk away at this point. I almost think that we might need to work on this, continue it, have this be one of our points of focus, and then dig down a little bit in the next meeting and then try and draft from that perhaps, or give some direction. What I'd say at this point is perhaps we leave some motions for later, talk about this, think about it a little more, talk with staff and try and formulate it and structure it better so that we just don't end up creating work for staff when we don't have a clear enough vision for them. So I'd resist it at this point, not because I oppose the concept, but because I don't think we've got a good enough vision of what we want quite yet.
Let me ask this question real quick of the mover of the legislation and the second. Is your intent for LSO to work with the Secretary of State's office to cover some of these situations that you mentioned and giving LSO kind of free rein in regards to covering some of these issues?
Mr. Chairman, I think it could happen in one of two ways. And I think Senator Rothfuss and I actually want the same thing. I just want, I think it's helpful if we come back in September with a bill in front of us to begin working from. And I think you can do that in one of two ways. You could, Mr. Chairman, direct LSO to get with the Secretary of State's office, but you could also, this committee could also just put a small working group on that. And we heard from some commercial agents today, it would not be a bad idea to put some of those, maybe one or two of those commercial agents into that fold as well, who are the ones speaking to us about what they do as an agent and what they believe they could continue to do. Meaning chiefly, the simple requirement of keeping the names of the series is really what we're talking about. So at the very least, we would have a bill that produces that, and as we continue to discuss it over the interim, we could fold in more duties and responsibilities for registered agents.
Mr. Chairman? I think I had Ms. Long first. Sorry, Senator.
Mr. Chairman, I would concur that it probably does require some off-session discussion, but it is related to a motion that I will make in a moment, which is to allocate funds to allow the Secretary of State to create an API and to work with the standards organizations like W3C to ensure that we have the future proofing. I love the idea of using open source technology. That all relates to how the registered agents would be integrating with the Secretary of State. So it is a related discussion, and it's not something that this task force can do in a vacuum without the input of the technologists. We heard a concurrence from the technologists that this is something Wyoming should do. It does sound like the Secretary of State's office is going to need to make additions to its database to be able to track the child LLC's names anyway. So we are looking at potentially requiring some additional funding for the Secretary of State. We may as well think, if we're going to do that, what exactly do we want the Secretary of State to do?
So, Ms. Long, there are several aspects of the Secretary of State brought together, and maybe, I don't know if the mover of that bill draft idea and the second would be all right with a friendly amendment to their motion to lump those together.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think that's appropriate.
Mr. Land, did you catch Ms. Long's comments in regards to an API? Okay. Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if the concept is really to rework the entire system so that this, from the Secretary of State's office out and then fund the funds for it, I think that's a specific enough motion, because we're not putting in the details. We're basically saying we need to rework the system in light of this new type of filing, and then figure out what the resources are, which is kind of similar to the discussion we had earlier, what are the resources it's going to take. I'm a lot more comfortable with that. I think that's a good motion, because we don't presuppose any type of outcome. I don't feel comfortable right now, honestly, telling a registered agent to do anything different, because we don't know what we're going to do in the Secretary of State's office, and there has to be that interface. The two solutions have to come together, or we won't be able to accomplish them. And I certainly think it's a good idea for us to look to a next generation filing system that uses an API, perhaps even utilizes a blockchain verification and authentication. That's a good system. So if that's the motion, I'll support that motion.
Mr. Chairman, I feel exactly the same, and I think it's critical that we do this, that for us to stay on the cutting edge. This is a competition with other states. And I think it's absolutely critical that we stay on the cutting edge of the technology in the Secretary of State's office.
Mr. Pope?
I agree, and I would support this motion.
Any other discussion in regards to the motion? I should make Representative Olson restate no, I'm joking. It's a little long-winded. So seeing no further discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. Motion carries. Mr. Land, do you have that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Great, and I would also remind the members of the task force that if you're the working group, we do not have the ability nor the wherewithal to pay you for the working group. So that time will be donated. So sorry, if you don't want to do it, just let me know, and I'll pick you for it. So any other motions or discussion in regards to the Secretary of State's testimony in regards to House Bill 126 or the filing aspect of House Bill 70?
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead, Mr. Pope.
I am not prepared to make a motion right now, but I believe the issue of when a series is dropped bears further discussion. And I would like to do some more research on it and then possibly make that motion at a later date. Is that acceptable?
Yeah, absolutely, Mr. Pope. And Mr. Land, can you also research that too and make sure that that's brought forward at the next committee meeting in Jackson? Yeah. Thank you. Any further discussion from the committee? All right, seeing none, we're going to go ahead and we're actually moving on. We're doing really good, and then now we're a little bit behind on our schedule, but that's actually okay because nobody's got nowhere to go, right? Good. So we're going to head right into our 10:30 schedule of the Banking Commissioner, Mr. Forkner. Commissioner Forkner, if you could please come down, and we'll start with you. And that will be in regards to cryptocurrency exemption overview.
I'm good. Morning, task force members. My name is Albert Forkner, the State Banking Commissioner here in Wyoming, and I actually have with me also Deputy Commissioner Joe Mulberry, oversees our what we call our non-depository side of the Division of Banking, which would include and has and does and will continue to evolve dealing with cryptocurrencies. So I guess I'll leave a little bit open-ended to your discretion, Mr. Chairman, as what exactly all you would like for us. One of the items was to look back at House Bill 19. Kind of give maybe for some of the task force members that were not part of the legislature this last year, a history of where we were, what got us to where we are now, if that's okay.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So under cryptocurrencies in a number of states fall under money transmission laws. In fact, Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN, has dubbed exchangers of cryptocurrencies, virtual currencies, as MSBs, money service businesses. State level, states license and supervise money transmitters, and depending on how the law is written in the individual state is whether it was captured under that state's money transmission laws. As you can imagine, 50 independent sovereigns plus the territories, there's no uniformity exactly within the state laws, so it is literally and figuratively all over the map. In Wyoming, the wallet service providers that held on to cryptocurrencies required licensing because of the nature of definition of monetary value of a cryptocurrency. So in Wyoming, you have always had the ability on an individual basis to exchange fiat currency or cryptocurrency person to person without a third party intermediary. Basically, I hand you $10, you hand me back that up. It seems intuitive, but and obvious, but that's not licensed activity. The same is true with cryptocurrency. So an individual could buy, sell, and hold cryptocurrencies on their own. That was never required any sort of licensing. The third-party wallet providers are what were required licensed. So we'll rewind a little bit to, I think, 2015 approximately, maybe even late 2014, when some of the large wallet providers started gaining prominence and actually recognition nationwide, starting to seek licensing in various jurisdictions, came to Wyoming seeking a money transmitter license. And under our existing law, there's certain requirements. Now, in Wyoming, I think it was 2003 that we passed the Wyoming Money Transmitters Act. So that did not contemplate cryptocurrencies at all. So trying to now pound this very square peg into a very round hole proved difficult for everybody involved. One of the requirements that a money transmitter has to have, and think of a company that like a Western Union, that's a name that we all recognize. They have to have a permissible investment against what all outstanding transmissions, i.e. simply collateral, if you will. So you go into Western Union or any company, you give them $100 and say, please transmit this across the country or around the world. That transmission fails for some reason, they have that $100 to give back to you. That's basically the idea. And so therefore that money, that $100 can act as the permissible investment. Cryptocurrency, and I should say that the current statute identifies what items can be allowable permissible investments. The commissioner does have the authority to authorize other items to be permissible investments. And so it was asked if we would consider cryptocurrency, and we said no, would not, due to a number of factors, security being the biggest one, and the ability, should a hack occur in a wallet, which I'm not sure that it has, it's been at the exchange level, and very significant at the exchange level, but how would the consumer be made whole? Because the Wyoming Money Transmitters Act that the legislature passed is a consumer protection law. So that then puts everyone at a kind of a standoff, because it's really not economically feasible for a company to hold anything to offset that amount of outstandings. But yet unwilling to allow them to put the cryptocurrency up as a permissible investment for fear that they may not be able to make the consumer whole. Different states have tried to tackle that. We actually talked with Senator Rothfuss and a few others a few years ago on this to see if we could come up with a solution, and really couldn't find something that felt that met the spirit of the Money Transmitters Act. And at that time, while some folks were very familiar with cryptocurrencies, it had not gained as much recognition nationally as it has today. So there was thoughts that maybe this will evolve into or continue to grow into a true currency. Fast forward now to where we are today, I would argue that the currencies still are too inefficient to be a true currency, to mirror that of a fiat, and too volatile to be a true store of value. And so trying to figure out what it is, and I think also looking at just about any article dealing with cryptocurrency, a mainstream article, they talk about the investment and people buying and holding on to it, hoping then an increase in value. So
I think, Commissioner, it's called HODL. I think
HODL. So yes, Mr. Chairman. And so here we are thinking, well, okay, we now have this law that didn't ever contemplate it in the first place. They are not acting as what we, in the same fashion as a fiat currency, and therefore probably does not fit under the Money Transmitter Act. I will tell you that I don't know if it's the minority, but it's got to be close to it from my state colleagues across the country of that view that it should not be inside the Money Transmitters Act. So you are welcome.
Commissioner, I think if memory serves me right, me and you have had this debate for several years now.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, absolutely. And yeah, talking about how do you pound this into existing law. So that's why then we were supportive of House Bill 19, and because understanding that it was, our view of how it fits within the law and the licensing requirements, these companies were not able to do business, licensed business. They were actually, doing unlicensed business, if you will, and allowing Wyoming citizens access to these types of activities and services should they, so desire. And so we were supportive of it, as you know, under the, statement that it becomes buyer beware in Wyoming. So, and that's fine. Like I said, even as a regulator, I don't believe everything should be regulated. Now, what people are looking for is in any type of a currency, and if you go back in the history of this country, is stability. They want to know if I hand you $1, what that value of that dollar is, and we recognize what that now we can talk whether it's gold standard or not and what it's backed by. That's a whole different economic discussion. But at one point in time, most, if not all, states in this union had its own currency, recognized within its own borders. Well, that's great until you start doing cross-border, transactions, and so we're at the same area right now, I think, with cryptocurrency. I think people are still looking for stability, still looking for scalability, and I think we're on the cusp of gaining both of those as I read articles. But nevertheless, did not fit within existing law. I think that's even been recognized because the Uniform Law Commission's been looking at it, and they finally dropped a uniform law that states can begin to investigate regarding the licensing and regulation of virtual currencies. Is it an option? Possibly. But even that, I would imagine that in 2017, late 2017 when that came out, there's probably been some evolution even in the crypto space that would render some parts of that uniform law a little stale. And that's, I guess, we'll have to deal with that when technology advances at such a pace. So that's where we were at. That's kind of the history of why we supported it. The understanding of, again, most people that are willing to, it's even beyond dabbling at this point. Maybe a few years ago it was dabble, but to be in the crypto space, a lot of them have a sense that, okay, I'm willing to take this risk because I see certain upsides, or I'm, in favor of the technology, whatever the motivation is. So we did not want to stand in the way. And one of the other items on the And actually, the next item on the agenda deals with two companies specifically, Coinbase and Circle. Coinbase being one of, if not the largest wallet provider in the United States, a multi-billion-dollar company, which is sizably larger when Bitcoin hit on nearly 20,000 in December. And Circle. We can talk in some generalities. We can't talk specifics. Obviously, as a licensed entity, there's a number of confidential items, or potential licensed entity, I guess, in this case. So Coinbase was wanting to do, they were one of the companies that wanted to provide wallet services that we just couldn't come to agreement on. And like I said, it was impeding their ability to do business. And we recognize that. We've reached out to both of those entities over the last couple of months, had discussions on what their plans are going forward now that they don't need the license from our office. They are both have told us that they are, as you can imagine, excited about what's going on here and the ability to come back. They're evaluating business plans as to what that'll look like, and how they want to open account, do account openings in the future, because they, remember they were operating for a couple of years without contemplating accounts in Wyoming. The ones that the Coinbase had there, they had to try to move out, or if they couldn't get a hold of the owners of the account, they had to put some sort of hold so you couldn't inadvertently open an account in Wyoming illegally. So, but what they're seeking right now is licensing that would deal with fiat currency. Basically, if they're doing any sort of exchange that deals with the fiat side of it, that still falls under the Money Transmitter Act, and therefore that's what they're looking at. Now, how they do that's where some of the business plans are being evaluated and moving forward. So that's kind of what we know on both of those companies. I think we all saw that Circle raised, I forget, a huge raise here in the last couple of weeks, at least it was announced in the last couple of weeks, and so they've got big plans. We see that. But what our interaction with them going forward will be solely fiat currency.
Commissioner, in regards to Circle and Coinbase and some of those issues, Coinbase, and just as kind of a background for those, and I'm sure probably everybody out there that is attending this meeting could probably give a better background than I can. But just so as a heads up for the folks that are watching the stream or anything like that, Coinbase in 2015, due to being regulated under the Wyoming Money Transmitters Act, essentially shut down, closed the accounts of the customers of the state of Wyoming. And in essence, some of those accounts are still frozen. Would that be accurate? So there's constituents, there's voters in the state of Wyoming with their assets frozen by accounts. Now, they did that because of the Wyoming Money Transmitters Act, with the help of Commissioner Forkner and the Wyoming legislature. We were able to rectify that through House Bill number 19. And the reason Commissioner Forkner is mentioning them now is because those assets are still frozen. Coinbase has yet to take action in regards to Wyoming's answer. It's actually one of those weird moments where the government actually worked faster than the private sector. So, and now I do know that there has been several contacts made within Coinbase, and hopefully a remedy will be found and a solution will be found soon, so that those assets can be unfrozen, because essentially it's being held hostage at this point. I think that's fair to say, Commissioner.
Mr. Chairman, sort of. And the reason I say it, I don't want to speak entirely for Coinbase. They're not represented here today that I know of. And so when we looked into this, they would argue that they were never frozen. Now, again, you have to suspend it at some point, because otherwise, if their system doesn't recognize Wyoming as a jurisdiction that they can't operate in because they're not properly licensed, that's the back end. And so now, and I also will say, we never did receive any complaints in our office. Now, maybe people didn't know where to complain to. I can appreciate that. But nevertheless, they would argue that they weren't frozen. Now, I will say, I don't think it was easy for people once they realized that, they needed to move, their whatever the virtual currency. And I think the three they were holding on to mostly, Litecoin, Bitcoin, and Ethereum, do something with that. again, I don't, maybe we split hairs, maybe some person says it's frozen, the company says, no, it's not. But either way, there were people that had difficulties moving that, and then most accounts, as our understanding, were fractions of Bitcoins. And so there were a couple where, again, when it hit $20,000, roughly rounded, that, you're talking some real money. The other thing is that I will say that, and we took a lighter approach, if you will. They were an unlicensed entity. They were doing unlicensed activity in Wyoming and therefore subject to penalty. And we chose not to pursue that because of, all of us were learning kind of as we, went. And so there could have been, substantial penalties assessed on the company, and we would have been well within our rights. But that would have, again, what purpose would that have served? And so, so we allowed them to work through that and try to figure it out. Again, don't want to make excuses for them that they can do that on their own. But I do know, because I actually used the term frozen when I reached out to them a couple months ago, and of course they were, the first response was, well, they were never frozen. So again, we can debate that all day long, but without them here to explain that, I don't know if it'd be a fair discussion beyond that. There has been communication. There should be the ability to gain access. There's also, they've been in the news for other issues as well. They've had some bumps in the road in other jurisdictions. I know other states are looking at the licensing that their state and how Coinbase and Circles and others interpret that licensing. Again, we're an outlier on some of that, and so there's a lot to be there done there in that space. But again, I guess the long story short is both of them do have plans of some type of re-entry and or opening account, the ability to open accounts in the state in the coming weeks, maybe months, depending on how sophisticated they want to go.
Just as a quick follow-up, and then I'll turn to my task force members. In regards to, I don't know if you can say this, but the way I understand it, the license that that Coinbase is currently seeking in regards to fiat currencies and transferring those within the state of Wyoming, I imagine at that time, once they receive said license, should probably trigger the rest of those accounts that were not frozen, just held, I don't know what you want to call it, they were frozen. Would that at that time, I mean, is that essentially the timeline we're looking at when they receive that license for when accounts could be unlocked again?
Probably. I mean, it would make sense. Again, it would be technically nothing prohibiting today, because again, the bill is effective immediately upon signing, and therefore they don't need to do anything. They could stand that up. Coinbase had set up I don't know if it was a subsidiary or an affiliate company that they're looking to try to handle fiat business to Wyoming consumers. They're looking at maybe they can unwind that because it's no longer needed. So practically speaking, that's probably what they'll do. And instead of running two tracks, just do it all at once. But and technically they could do any sort of crypto only transactions today and accounts today.
Ms. Long?
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Commissioner Forkner, for coming. I do. It's a little bit of a frustrating conversation with regards to Coinbase, precisely because they've not been communicative with Wyoming citizens. They've just not responded to a lot of the outreach. We know that there have been complaints that haven't come into your office, in part because some of the people who complained were in their teens and early 20s, and they found the Wyoming Blockchain Coalition, and we've been forwarded emails from Coinbase that leave us tremendously frustrated about how Coinbase has treated Wyomingites. And it's one of the things that we'd like to accomplish at least from our Wyoming Blockchain Coalition is solving this issue for the Wyomingites who have had their assets, well, I'll put it in quotation marks, frozen by Coinbase, because whether it was officially frozen or whether it was just due to the fact that Coinbase was not responding to them, the effect was the same. Is there anything that you can do to speed up that process independent of their application for licenses related to fiat? Because with regard to releasing their cryptocurrencies, they don't need a license to do that. Can we, now that we've finally gotten a hold of someone there, and by the way, for public record, Chairman Lindholm, I'm not sure if you would mind sharing that, A, we invited them to be here today, B, we talked about criminal referral if they did not respond, and C, the invitation went to the CEO of the company because we just couldn't get a hold of anybody. So this has been a tremendously frustrating situation. They deserve to be publicly called out for bad treatment of Wyomingites, and we really would like to get this resolved. So do you have the power right now to resolve this?
I'm gonna hop in real quick there, Commissioner, because we did just recently find out that our letter was returned. And the reason why is their address they've got listed on their website, they've actually moved. They just never updated their website, which tends to fall in line with what we've recently seen from Coinbase as far as not keeping those things up to date. But I do know for a fact that one of the employees of Coinbase knew about the letter of invitation weeks in advance. And if you're here from Coinbase, can you? Nobody? Okay. Go ahead, Commissioner.
Mr. Chairman and Ms. Long, I appreciate that. So I would say without advice of counsel next to me, I would say no. And the reason is because it's no longer licensed activity. And so therefore we have no jurisdiction. Yeah, they've been exempted out of it. Now, that being said, the Consumer Protection Unit of the Attorney General's office may be very interested in this. And so that's where I think it would have to go at this point. And again, their attorneys can look into that and what kind of actions can be taken on behalf of citizens of Wyoming. But that's maybe the one downside of exempting it out, because then they no longer have that authority. So
I suspect there'll be a motion made after we close public testimony. Any other questions for Commissioner Forkner? Mr. Pope.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Forkner, you said that there was a potential for penalties against Coinbase previously because of their activity. What's the statute of limitations on that?
Commissioner.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Pope, I'm not sure. I'd have to get our Attorney General's office involved in that.
Okay. Follow-up. Could that be a means of to use to open the door to negotiations on this?
Commissioner.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Pope, I understand what you're asking. I don't know if that's the kind of policy that we want coming out of the state of Wyoming and as a state agency. I think there is a time and a place for it. I think in my mind, it would be punitive at this point. I think because we, in essence, negotiated in somewhat good faith. You could say, did they honor it or not? Again, I'm speaking on behalf of a company, which I can't speak on behalf of, but I think the understanding was, and for the most part, for what we needed out of the Division of Banking, they complied with generally. Now, again, I understand, and even if one account, a consumer had a problem, I get that. I can appreciate that. I would think that, I don't know if I would like that approach after the fact. But again, that's something that the Attorney General's office can look at and would want to pursue. We would have to go through them anyway. That is our chief attorney, and chief counsel is the Attorney General, and so therefore they would be part of it at some point anyway. And if they deem it to be something that they want to pursue, somewhat retroactively, we can work with them on that with the information that we have.
Yeah, go ahead, Deputy.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Again, Joe Mulberry, Deputy Commissioner in Wyoming Division of Banking. So I just want to follow up, I think, just a little bit more. I actually had a conversation directly with the company yesterday regarding this issue. So it's essentially the same information that the Commissioner provided, but I just want to make sure that it's clear about the nature of what's considered to be frozen. So Back in 2015, when we were having discussions with the company and we denied their license, we directed them to notify Wyoming consumers who they had previously engaged in business with that they could no longer maintain their accounts. And so they sent out those messages. They froze the accounts with respect to saying that for the full functionality, and this is what the company has told me that they did. So the company has stated to us that they froze the accounts with respect to full functionality under their platform. So anybody that had a balance of virtual currency in their wallets, they could not send those anywhere and transact under their platform. The only thing that they could do, they stated that if the consumer logged into their account, they could log in and extract those virtual currencies off of the system. And so they could get their virtual currencies back. Now, they do acknowledge that there was a period of time that for technical reasons, consumers were prohibited from going on and getting those their virtual currencies back. But it was for technical issues. It wasn't that they, again, the company is claiming that they weren't just holding them and refusing to give them back. They stated yesterday that all of those issues have been resolved, and any of the current Wyoming accounts that are still out there, if those consumers were to log on today, they claim that the consumer would be able to log into their account and pull off their current existing balance of virtual currencies. So what they're frozen from is logging on and then using the totality of their platform to send to others and do some of those other things. But the company does claim that Wyoming consumers can go on today and get their virtual currencies back. Now, their plan, to follow up to another one of your questions, is that because they're pursuing this license that gives them full functionality to be able to do all business in Wyoming, once they obtain that license, the money transmitted license that they need for the fiat currency side of things, because all of their accounts have that element to it, once they get that license, then any of these accounts that are still out there for Wyoming, their plan is to just open them up and give those accounts full functionality again under the Coinbase system.
So Deputy, in regards to that license application, has that been filed with your office?
Mr. Chairman, no, it has not. But the indication is that it's going to be in the very near future. I know it's been indicated that they're preparing it, but as of today, we haven't received it, but we anticipate receiving it in the very near future.
So say that everything on their license application is spot on, to the point, no issues to your office. Can you give me a timeline on what the turnaround is?
Probably, Mr. Chairman, probably a matter of, because there's some background checks that need to be pulled, but it's probably a matter of weeks, from the time, if everything is complete, right? If we don't have to follow up for any missing information, if everything is complete and all the information is there, then yeah, it's probably a matter of just weeks for us to ensure that everything is there. And if everything is there, then it's a pretty easy process.
Okay. Any further questions any further questions, Ms. Long? Nope, Ms. Long is done. All right. Well, I think.
Mr. Chairman, I will just also,
Yeah, go ahead,
just on a
Commissioner.
sideline, and actually Ms. Long was part of it. So I just recently finished up chairmanship of what we call the Conference of State Bank Supervisors, and that's the association of all state regulators across the country. And one of the things that we've been addressing, we're talking about the licensing, and just for the task force education on this is we've stood up what we call a FinTech Industry Advisory panel, made up of, I think, 32 companies, some of them very large and nationally recognized, some smaller, in the payment space, in the lending space, and then some community banks that are active in fintech. And so licensing is one of those, and we're trying to, and we license all entities in Wyoming, and most states are getting all of their licenses on there through the nationwide multi-state licensing system. We had a bill that went through to bring collection agencies on that as well. But and we are right in the middle of a probably a near $50 million project to do the next generation of the NMLS 2.0 to where it will streamline licensing for these companies, because we do have this patchwork quilted, quote unquote, of state licensing. How do we do that? And maintain our independent sovereign here in Wyoming, and let the policymakers decide what we want here, but yet allow these companies to work nationally and reduce points of friction. And so we are investigating that. And Ms. Long actually came and spoke on a panel to help educate regulators as to some of the benefits and again what we're dealing with today, blockchain technology, and how that intersection will play. So hopefully, as Joe mentioned, the weeks of approvals, our goal is to even get that down considerably over the next year as we try to stand up this new platform. But just wanted to let you know that is an initiative that actually was kind of started under my chairmanship last year and continues on.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead, Senator.
What about the possibility of expanding the use of blockchain registration and authentication within your office? And you have a little bit of a luxury as an office of being funded by user fees, and so you have revenue, you have the ability to actually buy new things and hire people to do work, which is untrue of most of our agencies. Have you talked about modernizing that and incorporating blockchain technology?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, so are you implying that we should have an additional tax on the
just a dollar
entities
or
of?
two.
No, I understand what you're saying. Yeah, and we do. In fact, this is something, and maybe if it'll segue into the next topic. Yeah, there's got to be ways of that to utilize it. Government use cases of blockchain technology, are probably still in its infancy. Spoke with the CIO to see what the state of Wyoming is doing in blockchain. They're doing some very, Mr. Young said they're just trying some very simple uses of it out of their office. I think, again, we still fall under all of the requirements of the state of Wyoming. And also, as you all know, the purse strings are still held within the legislature through the appropriations process. And mind you, we're on the same appropriate level we have been over the last 4 bienniums, by the way. So anyway, but yeah, there are opportunities there. And I think we will continue to look at them. Like I said, our focus right now is for the entities that we license. Let's help them out first, because yes, government can move at glacial speed when we want to, and so that's been the primary focus. But point is noted, and I think that it's only a matter of time, and maybe licensing will be the next iteration of that. So the other thing that we do, and if again, Mr. Chairman, the questions we had during the session and whatnot is now the intersection, non-depository, dealing with the Coinbases and whatnot in the money transfer license. That, as I said, that's within this state law, and it's a lot easier to navigate. We're a lot more nimble. I think again this last session proved that. So let's cross into commercial banking. And that's where things come to a kind of a screeching halt as far as integrating this, a full-on integration. Now, that's not to say that there's a number of institutions, mostly the larger ones because they've got the capacity, but looking at various blockchain, crypto type initiatives. Chairman Lindholm, remember, brought forth an amendment, and I see parts of that coming up tomorrow, trying to get authorized crypto into the banking environment. And then we talked briefly about, even if I consider myself the most progressive bank regulator in the country, and we passed it, it would in essence preempted by federal banking law in the sense that you've got the FDIC and the Federal Reserve.
Wait a second, Commissioner. Are you saying that federal regulators don't like Lindholm amendments?
Mr. Chairman, if I could get them to opine on that, I would be able to. I was as shocked as the rest of my colleagues were that for this last year, I had a kind of a national pulpit to speak from as chairman, but people kept questioning why the bank regulator from little old flyover Wyoming is pushing the chairman of the FDIC, talking to Governor Lael Brainerd, and having a sidebar conversation with Secretary Mnuchin on banking and blockchain, and talking to officials at FinCEN, and all of them, the ones that would speak verbally, were like, what? But we have, and again, I commend our legislature that we have forced a conversation. I have brought this up at every venue that my federal colleagues were at. Again, I was actually closer to you than from Mr. Chairman, the chairman of the FDIC, who has of an hour ago, we have a new chair, Yelena McWilliams. So we'll be having those same conversations to, okay, what do we do? But you've got to think about, is it a permissible activity, as will the FDIC insure it? And in Wyoming, you can't have a financial institution, a bank, commercial bank or savings bank without FDIC insurance. So if we were to pass that law, again, it would just sat there. Is that good policy to have a law on the books, or is it good to have a placeholder? I think we'll continue to have those discussions. We did, and I've reached out, and there are certain things, and we've looked at, well, can some of these things be done at the holding company? And at the holding company, we have to look at source of strength of the holding company. And if your banks are engaged in speculative activity, and I think we can all agree that true cryptocurrency transactions right now is very speculative in nature because of the volatility in the price. And so it would not be deemed a permissible activity at the bank level. It would not be deemed a permissible activity at the holding company level. And so getting them into that space. Now, there are groups out there that are looking to get into banking. I think some are more noble, some are less noble in their intentions, because we can't get them to speak to our federal colleagues. They're just now doing that. But they're looking to acquire institutions to get into the payment space, to the custody issue that we talked about earlier, I heard discussed, to see if a bank in Wyoming can be a bona fide custodian. Again, I would question, we don't have an institution that is domiciled in Wyoming that has that level of sophistication at this point. There's just, and so I would be hard pressed to approve it, because it would be, an unsafe and unsound banking practice today. But that, I think it gets us to thinking about, what does that look like? How do we get banking into this space? And so, and I think we provided you, Mr. Chairman, a few others back in February or maybe March about some questions. The answers to questions that were raised to us, but every time we would answer one, then we brought up two more questions that need to be followed up on. And so we can continue to try to investigate what we can, look into it. But unfortunately, it's the intersection of crypto and banking, again, not blockchain, crypto. That's, I think we're a ways off now. And timeframes in that, and that could be next week as fast as things change. But that will move much slower than things that can be done at the state law level.
And I'll remind the task force that we will be covering banking amendments and what that looks like tomorrow. So if you have any questions about that, I believe Commissioner Forkner, you'll be joining us for tomorrow.
Love the drive over the hill, Mr. Chairman.
Great. You could just spend the night. It's a little bit more of a drive for Senator Driskill.
I would not stay in my kid's apartment, sorry.
So any questions? I'm going to stick us on point of House Bill number 19, Coinbase, Circle, any of those organizations? Any comments? No?
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead, Senator.
Thank you. I just will ask, will you follow up with us and send out an email when you hear back a little bit more about Coinbase? I think we're all very interested in understanding how that proceeds. So if there are any developments there, please inform the committee. You can send it to LSO and they'll distribute it back out to us.
Mr. Chairman, yes, we will. And actually, that was going to be part of my comment. So based upon the conversation that I had yesterday with the company about those accounts that are currently outstanding, the discussion that we had, I asked them to document all of that in writing and provide that to me. So I'm waiting to get that. And so as soon as we have some documentation, we will share that. And just kind of follow up again, at the risk of taking a contrary position to my boss who's sitting next to me, we've not yet ever received any actual complaint to our office from an actual consumer. I mean, you mentioned that there's several out there that are unwilling to contact our office. Now,
Deputy, I'm gonna stop you right there,
Sure.
because I've been running bills on that situation for 2 years. Those complaints came directly to a state legislator, and was made into a bill format and was passed on to your commissioner. So absolutely, those complaints came forward. Now, granted, they might not have been in the format you expected, but I will hazard a guess that the average user of cryptocurrencies in the state of Wyoming don't know that the Division of Banking even exists. And their only outreach at that point was to look up their state representative. So it was a little bit different way to go. But we have been, as a commissioner, I think you were at some of those committee meetings.
Right.
We've been, in fact, I think the last time we even debated this, Senator Rothfuss was the chair of the Digital Privacy Task Force. So absolutely, those issues cropped forward. And those were from constituents, those were from individuals in the state of Wyoming that are being affected. So granted, they are not through the traditional method that you expect, they did come forward.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, the complaints that I recall seeing back then was the fact that consumers were being told that they had to close their accounts because of the actions of our office with respect to the administration of the Money Transmitter Act. I guess what I don't believe that we've ever received is an actual consumer contacting our office or getting the documentation on a specific consumer, giving us the evidence to say, I tried to, I contacted the company and I'm trying to get my virtual currency back and I'm unable to do so. At that point, then I do believe that we would investigate that complaint, and I do believe we would have the authority to take some action because the action occurred prior to the House Bill 19, and the action was back when we did regulate that activity. I do believe that we could probably investigate that complaint. We received a couple of anonymous items in the mail that says, hey, this is what Coinbase is doing, but it wasn't tied to a specific consumer. Again, we reach out to the company, have discussions with that, but if there are people out there that are having the difficulties that are being talked about, if they will contact me, I would be happy to try to help them and act, and I will act, and I will have the direct discussion with the company about those specific accounts.
Ms. Long.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Deputy. We tried the light touch approach, which was to sort of, shed light in the press on this problem. And through the Wyoming Blockchain Coalition, nobody was willing to give their names because they're afraid of letting just the security reasons that, a lot of folks don't want to have it be publicly known that they own cryptocurrencies because they become a target. And so it's an interesting conundrum, but one did share an email with CoinDesk, who wrote an article about this, and they did quote the customer service, the Coinbase customer services response that was very unacceptable, and that was after House Bill 19 took effect. So Coinbase could have said, yes, we realize we don't need a license to unfreeze your account, but they basically just punted. At least they did respond to this person. There were a couple of others that just never got a response.
Mr. Chairman, if I could follow up. And so, yeah, as Joe spoke, that did remind me that we do have the ability, because of pre-law, to go back, and I'm pretty sure that we would have the support of the Attorney General's action if we ever had to go to any sort of hearing. And to the willingness to share, and again, if you know individuals, it comes into our office, there are strict confidentiality laws that govern it. And so that there's not an access for the public to get a hold of that information. There's actually two different statutes that we fall under regarding confidentiality. So I would encourage, again, if you know of people, and that would, when we can tie a specific name and an action and a date, and it will remain confidential.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioner. I think from my perspective, just an additional comment is I'm not interested in putting Coinbase through the ringer. I'm just interested in getting, speaking on behalf of the folks that actually showed up at our event in Cheyenne or contacted the Wyoming Blockchain Coalition, they just want their money back. It's as simple as that. So if Coinbase would just get off their whatever they're sitting on and just do it, it would just be easy, and we can just move on.
Mr. Chairman. Oh, go ahead, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It would be nice if we could find somebody actually who was experiencing that problem and have them test what a deputy was saying, which is that if they have the ability right now to withdraw their currency, everything's fine. And the question is, do they? And unfortunately, we don't have that information. We don't have anyone that we can test that with. But if anyone here knows somebody firsthand that they can have that conversation with, Chairman, maybe that would be a good one to have tonight.
Senator, I think that's, well, part of what Ms. Long testified to as is there are individuals that have contacted us, but they don't really want to self-identify themselves to a governmental agency in regards to a company that they're going to want to continue working with. I mean, that kind of puts themselves in a negative.
Mr. Chairman, that's not what I meant. I meant if they can just test individually, if you know them, whether they've want to identify publicly, if you can just have the conversation, try withdrawing some coin tonight. If they're capable of withdrawing it, this matter's resolved. And hopefully they'll be able to, in the future, utilize all of Coinbase's services. They'll go through with that request. But for now, the only reasonable obligation we should have for them is they should be able to withdraw their coin. Senator Driskill did point out that they might have lost some potential value in that coin as a result of the delay. Yeah, they'll get half of the dollars back if they cash out. But that does go into we passed buyer beware from the value standpoint. So we're going to stand by that, I think.
Right. Ms. Long?
Mr. Chairman, I would encourage whoever communicates with Coinbase, if it's you, Mr. Deputy, to encourage them to make a public announcement, because they did make a public announcement about their withdrawal from Wyoming, and they've had these stories where we've attempted to get them to say what their plan is. Really, the right thing, you probably can't force them to do it, but the right thing for them to do would be to announce to everyone, because there will be, again, we're dealing with, you met some of the folks, I think. There was a young couple who drove from Newcastle to the event in Cheyenne. They're probably not looking at traditional communication channels. They need to hear it directly from Coinbase.
Mr. Chairman, if I will, that request has been made, and partly
Great.
because I was a little bitter that how they exited and misrepresented the exit. But so I asked them if we would be able to have the same announcement that they are now able to. So they said that they would, but again, we'll see.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Ms. Long.
Thank you. I will reach out to the person who asked to remain anonymous, who allowed me to share that email with CoinDesk from the Coinbase customer service representative, and ask him to test it, and we'll let you know.
Great. Any further discussion? Okay, thank you, Commissioner and Deputy. We'll move to public comment in regards to House Bill 19 and Coinbase Circle. So, Mr. Allen. And just once again, just state your name for the record.
Christopher Allen, Blockchain Commons. So I don't want to talk, about some of the banking things and custody and qualified. We can bring that to the other session, but specific to this discussion, there are two kind of high-level things going on. One of which is that we have obligations as regulators around fiduciary responsibility. When someone else has your assets, they have a responsibility to you about those assets, and the government regulatory bodies have to make sure that those responsibilities are properly taken. The problem with a lot of the digital asset world is that what exactly custody means becomes varied. So one of the things I would really like to make sure that you protect and keep in mind in the future is the sort of self-sovereignty of the individual around certain types of things. The only reason why Coinbase or anybody else needs to be regulated is because they are holding the coins. They have a fiduciary responsibility, and there have been major screw-ups, even recently, by various exchanges where they've lost money and socialize the losses without, properly doing things, et cetera. We don't want that to happen, but that doesn't mean that that's the only way you can exchange with other people. There are what are known as atomic cross-chain transfers. There's a variety of zero custody exchanges, et cetera. So please, when you're thinking about this type of stuff, to carve out enough so that people can buy and sell assets directly from and to each other as peers. Just like I can go out and buy that piece of artwork at the corner, and go say, this is a fabulous piece of artwork, save it for a couple of years, and then go, sell it to a collector. I can do that on my own recognizance. There's no fiduciary responsibility there, whatever. So please protect the ability of peers to do this, these types of things.
Go ahead, Senator.
And Mr. Chairman, I'll look to the banking commissioner. We never had a problem with that. As I understand it, that's always been fully legal, no regulation of any sort, and none intended or looking forward.
Yeah, which does bring me to the next point, which is we do need in Wyoming a licensed exchange. It is a barrier to a lot of your goals that there isn't somebody who can participate and help facilitate some of these types of transactions. And as you work out your details with the various reasons why people either haven't applied or whatever in your legislation, don't accidentally backslide on that principle. So I am aware that you're very good as in your regulations around peers, but don't backslide on that when trying to bring in a Gemini or whoever else might want to be playing in this space in the Wyoming field. Because you do need one, and the sooner the better in some ways. Obviously, we would like some competition there too. So that's it.
Any further questions for Mr. Allen? Seeing none, thank you, sir. Any other public testimony? Go ahead. And then once again, just state your name for the record.
Arthur Vanguard, FU7 Corporation. Mr. Chairman, distinguished appointees, I would take a completely contrarian point of view to my predecessor. I believe that cryptocurrency exchanges as well as wallets should be completely exempt from any regulation, and private industry is perfectly capable of taking care of self-regulation. The reason that cryptocurrency market and ICOs and innovation is growing is precisely because this market was not regulated for a very long time. If we look at the dynamics in the software development in general, software development is another sector which is not regulated. Anybody can start writing applications and selling them to anybody pretty much. The entry barriers caused by government regulations inhibit growth of technology and growth of business. As far as I understand concerns of Ms. Long, and I perfectly agree with you, ma'am, that the method in which Coinbase behaved was deplorable. And this is bad business practice. However, as a result, they lost customers who moved to other companies that provided better customer service. As far as security, safety of customer deposits, if we look at cryptocurrencies as currencies, this can be solved through private insurance, private deposit insurance, and then let individuals decide if they want to do business with wallets and cryptocurrency exchanges that have private deposit insurance or not. If there was any regulation or government initiative that I would sign up for, would be a requirement that each client of cryptocurrency exchange would be informed about potential risks and disclosure by the company on a separate form, not in a tiny print at the end of 100-page contract, but a separate form basically disclosing potential risk of doing business in this sector with this specific company. So that's one thing. Bringing banking regulations and money transmitter laws onto blockchain sector will not only inhibit the growth of technology, but I don't believe it will provide any safety to the consumers. Banking sector is already regulated, and I can cite many cases of mortgage fraud, manipulating LIBOR rates, commingling accounts, gambling on the stock market with consumer deposits, and so on. So government regulations do not prevent fraud in the banking industry. On a separate note, not related to this subject, since I won't be able to attend tomorrow's session, I'd like to make additional suggestion to allow cryptocurrencies and token to be used in the games of chance. I know that this is a controversial subject because gambling always brings a lot of emotions. However, we also know that gambling is a huge source of revenue for states that implement this kind of regulation. If state of Wyoming would exempt, or maybe different way, if state of Wyoming would regulate in a streamlined way and permit gambling using cryptocurrencies and tokens, this could be a huge source of revenue for the state. And this could be limited in the scope, for example, to only online gambling, but this could also be open to the on-premises commercial gambling. So this would be my suggestion to the task force. Thank you.
Any questions? No?
Mr.
Ms. Long, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, just a quick response. I think we're going to be covering exchanges this afternoon under HB 70, which speaks to exchanges. And your point about risk disclosure, I think the Secretary of State's office has some views on consumer protection. So let's, if it's okay, let's bring that back up. We appreciate your testimony. It is worth also mentioning, though, that HB 19 does actually exempt cryptocurrencies from Wyoming's regulation. It is, as Commissioner Forkner said, caveat emptor for Wyomingites who are participating, so they are not regulated.
But
go ahead.
But cryptocurrency exchanges fall under money transmitter laws, if I understand well, no?
No, sir.
Okay.
Not after House Bill 19. So actually,
that's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Absolutely. And I'm not associated with Coinbase, Mr. Chairman, Ms. Long.
I don't blame you.
And I don't condone their conduct. However, my company is involved in development of trading technologies, and I am very intimate with how the trading exchanges work and are programmed. And if state of Wyoming prohibit Coinbase from doing certain type of business, it's not very easy to actually alter the entire accounting logic of the software, alter the database, alter how accounts are being settled. So I understand why Coinbase could not comply with returning money to the consumers right away. Implementing this kind of modification takes time, and it is also risky because doing it on the operational platform can create problems for other consumers. So like I said, they do have a legitimate reason for delay.
Mr. Chairman, yes, your point is well taken, and I don't think any of us are looking for immediacy. We were looking for some announcement that it was even being addressed.
Yeah, that's definitely.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Vanguard.
Thank you.
Any other public comment in regards to House Bill number 19? Yes, ma'am. And state your name for the record, please.
Hello. I'm Krista Pontius from BullPay. I'm the Director of Partnerships and Consulting. To the Coinbase issue, I am not exactly sure how this is relevant. However, I'm going to share this, and I'm thinking out loud in a way. I had dinner with a friend last night who's from Wyoming, has lived in Cheyenne for years, and she knew why I was in town to participate in this. She said, you know what? I don't think I can get into cryptocurrency. I don't think I'm supposed to do that. I said, where'd you hear that? She said, my financial advisor says it's dangerous. It's something that, and I can't, I don't want to misquote, but she had an understanding that there were barriers in Wyoming to even getting involved in cryptocurrency. I'm not sure that that is completely unrelated from the Coinbase issue.
Right.
So what I'm really here to back up is the idea that it needs resolution, and that resolution needs to be publicized in a very positive way. I think it's very important for this story to have a good ending, and I hope that this task force will take that very seriously in bringing that about. And then the other issue that I wanted to mention was, in kind of listening to the banking issues and how banking looks at cryptocurrency as very volatile, a token economy answers that. Creating a tokenized economy isn't volatile in the way that cryptocurrency is. It's just a utilitarian exchange. So, what I heard as a representative of a technology company is very interesting and motivating. And I would encourage the state to really look at creating some tokenized economies for people, particularly to get around the banking issues of the perception of volatility, or the fact, really, of volatility with regard to cryptocurrencies.
Any questions for Ms. Pontius? Seeing none, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Any other further public comment on House Bill number 19? Seeing none, I'm going to close public discussion. Task Force, is there any actionable items you would like to make?
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would entertain a motion here, and I think the bulk of the discussion that we've had over this topic, this section, has been about Coinbase. And as a representative of the people, a fiduciary, even of the People's Trust, I feel like my hands are tied, and maybe this task force hands are somewhat tied. I feel like we've had some really good testimony from Commissioner Forkner on I guess the extent of what the Banking Commission can and can't do. What we haven't seen is what the Attorney General's office can do. And there was a reference made to the Consumer Protection Division, but I think we ought to take the next step. And so I don't know if this is an appropriate motion, Mr. Chairman, but I guess I would make a motion to direct our Commissioner Forkner, to contact the Consumer Banking Division of the Attorney General's office with the information that you have regarding Coinbase, and ask specifically the Attorney General's office if there is any actionable cause regarding Coinbase, and that they do investigate that.
I would second that.
We have a second discussion on the motion. Go ahead, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have two concerns there. First of all, we certainly can't direct the commissioner to do anything. We can ask him to take those steps and share the information with us, and that would be in order. The second, though, is that from what we've heard, we have a resolution. And if the resolution is in place, then I don't want the commissioner to go look into follow-up punishment if Coinbase has already complied. So I think we're a little bit premature on that, and we should look into whether or not Coinbase has complied before we ask the AG's office to begin to take a look at this. And it certainly would be in order for us, and I think the way to do it wouldn't even necessarily be to ask the commissioner, but to send a letter from the co-chairs to the AG's office and make a request that they work with the commissioner and his office on doing an investigation to find out if anything is out of sorts there. So that's the path that I think would be in order for us to proceed if we chose to. But again, we have information from yesterday that we have compliance with what we need to have compliance with. I think until we've looked into that and either verified that it's taken place or verified that it hasn't, going further would be premature.
Ms. Long.
Mr. Chairman, may I suggest that Representative Olson amend the motion to recommend to the Banking Division to give Coinbase a certain period of time to respond, and if they don't respond in writing as they requested, that you then speak to the Attorney General. So so we don't end up, so we have the proper sequencing.
Mr. Chairman, I'm fine with that amendment, and I just want to speak to the comments from my good colleague, Senator Rothfuss, and clarify that I understand that, and maybe that's why I said I want to make sure this motion is appropriate. I understand that not trying to direct the good commissioner to do anything. I think it's coming from the committee and understanding our working relationship. What I'm asking the commissioner to do is take the information he has and move it to the next step to the Attorney General's office. But I do think it's appropriate because I do not think that even if it is true that a citizen of Wyoming whose assets were frozen could access them now, I don't think that necessarily means that there's a resolution. There's still a harm that occurred, and there still may be an actionable cause that the Consumer Protections Division of the Attorney General's office may need to take to protect Wyoming citizens. So I do think it is prudent for this committee and the Banking Commission and the Attorney General's office to take the next step for Wyoming citizens, especially as we endeavor down this road deeper and deeper into cryptocurrencies. We need to make sure that we set the tone very early, very clear that we are going to protect Wyoming citizens.
Commissioner, what's a timeline that you would be acceptable to in regards to reaching out to Coinbase and hearing back from them before you would speak with the AG's office, if you were to do that?
So, Mr. Chairman, realizing we're suspending the protocol and opening up at least partial testimony.
It's good to be chair.
So I understand what the goal is here, and so what I will do is we will go back to see, and I'll ask our AG representative. Actually, I'll just shoot him an email a little bit later. Do we have to have a specific case to pursue? Can we refer over to them concerns? What's the protocol that they need from us? Again, not being an attorney, I only play one when I try to administer the law. Can they go based on, hey, we've got some concerns that there might be some consumer harm out there, but we don't have an individual named, or do we need a name? So I'll look into that to see what the steps are. And what we usually do, just to give you a sense of time frames, is we usually set about a 30-day window once we engage a company or we reach out and say, okay, we need additional information. Certain things are set by statute, but in this type of event, we would give them 30 days to then say, okay, you're now made aware of what our concerns are. Within 30 days, we expect a response, or we'll take the next step. But in the interim, while we're waiting on documentation of the conversation yesterday, I will speak to the Attorney General's office and see if there's something, what avenues are at least available.
I think that kind of, I think that settles things as far as the motion and the seconder. If you guys are all right with withdrawing at this time, because Commissioner Forkner is going to handle it on his own.
Yes.
Great. And we look forward to hearing back from you. If you hear anything, please if you wouldn't mind, contact our LSO attorney and pass that on.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, and I realize actually I just lost an opportunity there to seek an increased appropriation and expand my staff.
That's a fail. Yeah. All right. All right. Any other discussion from the task force in regards to House Bill number 19 or the testimony received from the Commissioner of the Division of Banking? Seeing none. All right. We're going to go ahead and move on to the next section. We're on to number 4. We're about an hour and a half behind. So we'll probably get to about 12:45 before we stop for lunch. If I could get Department of Enterprise and Technology Services, Mr. Sean Moore. Mr. Moore.
Good afternoon, Chairman Lindholm. My name is Sean Moore. I am the Chief of Services Officer for Enterprise Technology Services for the state of Wyoming. And I'm sitting in kind of as a late minute invite, and I want to appreciate the committee for all the work it's done. Thank you for the invite. We are I think the question was, or when I was asked to kind of present, is kind of what are some of the things that we're looking at the state level on blockchain technologies, and then some possibilities in state government for different types of opportunities to build on blockchain. So currently right now with the with what we're doing with we're pretty much in an investigation mode right now with at the state. Internally with ETS, we've identified maybe a few processes that we could build upon, a blockchain technology. One of them is we have a process, and it's called an RFC, or a request for change process. So in IT, when you are doing any updates or upgrades to any systems or software, anything like that, it's kind of a very detailed process to make sure that the user knows what's going on, the business owner knows what's going on, as well as all the other technical staff within the agency. So one arm does not break the other. And we felt that that process right there might be a very good one to start small, because there is a it's kind of that perfect supply chain kind of information to keep on the block. And we've also identified that it would be very good for auditing purposes. So if we're doing changes, let's say for Department of Family Services and the IRS comes out, that's something that could be very audible using kind of the blockchain technology. But right now, on kind of behalf of ETS, we're just kind of in an exploratory mode. We're going to have to probably reach out to industry experts to kind of figure out the infrastructure that we need to put in place. I know the University of Wyoming is very active in some of the development, and it is our intention to circle back with them to find out opportunities on that. So,
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Senator.
Has there been any discussion about just having basically a public ledger as sort of a first step, where you work with the university, the colleges, our agencies, ETS, and put together the infrastructure that can be used for whatever purpose? I mean, the biggest barrier initially is, what the hell do I do with the blockchain, right? That's step one. And most of the folks that might have an interest in having this distributed ledger wouldn't know. So working together, coordinating with the other agencies and the rest of the Wyoming government to develop a system in the beginning, so that if somebody did want to utilize it, there would be something there.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Senator Office. Yeah, absolutely, because here's one of the things, right? Do we build on a block that's already built out there? Do we go with that technology that's already out there, or do we work with, let's say, the state agency, the University of Wyoming, maybe the school districts and all their infrastructure to help develop the nodes and do a private kind of blockchain for the state of Wyoming? Those are discussions that we are having. It's just we're in our infancy of kind of figuring out the whole ecosystem and whatnot. And we have had folks like Caitlin Long come in and help us understand more of what we need to do. We've been part of the blockchain coalition, and David Pope has come in and kind of explained blockchain and is helping us drill down a little bit more. We sent a big contingency down to the Global Blockchain Summit, which was hosted in Denver, Colorado, there in Aurora, and found out a lot of really cool things and a lot of cool possibilities that could be done with the technology. So,
Mr. Chairman,
Senator, go ahead.
Well, I think that would be honestly a great product that would make Wyoming a leader. We were talking before, and obviously you were listening to that, of trying to get the Secretary of State's office engaged in this. Well, they would have to then set up their entire infrastructure. Any other agency, the Treasurer's office, if they wanted to do anything, set up their entire infrastructure. So the barrier to entry right now for any individual agency to engage in any way is so high that no one's going to do it. But if we had a concerted effort where we created a statewide network of nodes and we had our own private network, anybody could then engage with it just as soon as they were ready. The barrier is much lower. And that seems like the kind of thing where the university, I know, can get engaged in that. Your expertise, and heck, we can probably even do that without an additional appropriation potentially, if we're utilizing current resources and the expertise that we have in-house at our various agencies in the university. What are your thoughts on that as something that we could achieve within the next several months to a year?
Mr. Moore.
Well, Mr. Chair, Senator Office, Within the next few months, I would say that would be a pretty daunting task. I think, again, there's a lot of discovery that has to happen. Just kind of thinking of it, if we adopt a certain blockchain technology, and let's say it's an open source technology, the benefits of doing that is all the developers continuously building and developing on that technology, versus if we do something privately, what do our resources look like, and how does that develop over time if we develop our own private network? But
yeah, go ahead, Senator.
When I said private, I didn't mean
Okay.
closed source.
Okay.
I still mean open source existing technology. I just mean basically build up our own network so that we can engage internally and start to utilize the system within the state of Wyoming. We'd have all of the resources. So no, I'm not talking reinventing an entirely new blockchain system. My apologies.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, go ahead, Mr.
I would have to maybe defer to some experts who have helped build out a network with nodes and understand the type of infrastructure and type of things that we need to do. The software, I don't know if you even need software to be putting on these nodes. So that's the kind of consultation that we would need to figure out a plan of how we could build that out.
Ms. Long, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question for you, Administrator Moore, on the IT infrastructure of the state. My understanding is the Secretary of State's office, because it is by constitution segregated from the rest of the executive branch. It has a special status. Not every state does it that way. Wyoming does. There are other states out there that do. So it has sort of its own independent IT infrastructure. If we do end up recommending appropriations to set up an API, and they do end up engaging with W3C and do some things, does that mean that the rest of the state would not be able to benefit from that? Should we be thinking about some sort of, do you see my question? Right. It's an IT infrastructure question.
Mr. Chair, Ms. Long, I don't think the nodes and the infrastructure of the unified network it would be an issue, because we are kind of the network provider of the Secretary of State. Yes, they are their own entity, but virtually we separate them, but everybody rides the same network. So when we're talking about the unified network, it is all state agencies, it is all school districts. At least we hand off internet connectivity to school districts. Anything past their firewall, then that's their own network. So I believe we have a robust network in place, and I think it would fit into the theory of, 6 years ago we consolidated resources. Now under Director Young, we are optimizing those resources, and I think this would fit under the optimization of technology for the state.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Moore, thank you again for appearing today. My question is more process oriented. Can you outline for me the process you are going through right now, and the timeline that you're looking at, the kind of the specific steps to achieving that overall strategy of converting to state functions to blockchain?
Well, the timeline right now, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. The timeline right now, Mr. Pope, again, we're just in a fact gathering mode to figure out how to put together a strategic plan of how we would like to lay this out. And that's why we have met with the likes of you and Caitlin, and there's a few other entities that we have talked to on just where do we start. Because while we have a lot of technical people and we have developers and whatnot, it's still, where do we start with all this, as well as time and the resources that we have for it. Being a state agency, we do have budgets that are somewhat dedicated to certain purposes. And so finding kind of those funds and the time and the strategic plan to put that together, I would say if it was a 10-step timeline, we're still in step number 1.
Thank you. Quick follow-up. The reason I'm going into this is because I believe that the effort needs to be, we need to continue to push it forward and continue to focus on it and create well-defined steps, even during the fact-finding mode. When will that fact-finding mode be complete? When will the decisions be made, and continue to push forward with this in order to achieve any benefit from it at all?
Understood, sir.
Mr. Moore? Good.
Mr. Chair.
Any further questions for Mr. Moore? Seeing none. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Please stick around in case we decide to get crazy on you.
I'll be here both days.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. And thank you to your staff for setting up the ability to live stream. Hopefully are we getting views, guys? Awesome. Awesome. We want more of that. Hopefully this becomes the norm, especially on the House chamber floors. I don't know that the Senate.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
Down at the Global Blockchain Summit, what was interesting, and shout out to the folks here because we are broadcasting worldwide, but it was interesting that in the opening keynote, they had put governments and organizations that are kind of on the forefront. And so you read like, I can't remember all the countries, but then there was Wyoming, right? So it was Wyoming and Thailand and Japan and all these other countries. So again, tremendous thank you to the legislature and all the supporters for the initiative. So
Thank you, sir. Yeah, the Wyoming legislature's hip. Who knew? Mr. Klontz. Bet you wonder why you're here. And this is the Wyoming lottery. Essentially, is Mr. Klontz.
Yeah, good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is John Klontz. I'm the CEO of the Wyoming Lottery, and I have Robin Reining here with me today. She's my Chief Operating Officer.
So, sir, do you want me to start or?
Please do.
Okay. And the reason the blockchain task force, I asked you to be here is because there's actually companies that are reaching out to the state of Wyoming wondering if there's an aspect that can incorporate blockchain and lottery. So I've got a couple questions. How using blockchain and mobile ticket purchases could reduce infrastructure spend and increase security and integrity in lottery operations? And now these are going to be kind of big for you, so you can just kind of give me a general overview. But I do have an ask at the end that I think Senator Driskill will appreciate. How mobile ticket purchases could increase customer insight, convenience, and dignity through tracking users and enforcing gambling limits and controls. How mobile international and new large jackpot global game sales could increase revenues. Do you want to, and specifically, I guess, in regards to, I'm guessing you're aware of courier services and what those applications look like. New Jersey recently adopted some legislation that really covers a broad base of courier services in regards to reselling of lottery tickets. And I was wondering if you have any opinions on those courier service applications and whether that would be allowable under current law in the state of Wyoming or if legislative changes would be needed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll do my best to answer those questions. First of all, I think, you know, the law as it relates to the Wyoming lottery is pretty restrictive. There's no online gaming. There's no opportunity to have any type of vending that doesn't have a person there for you to interact with. So this would be a hindrance to any kind of blockchain situation, I think, to begin with. Then there's the issues with whether or not online gaming is legal to begin with. So I think it would be a major leap. I think also it would take the entire industry sort of shifting in that direction. You know, they still use a random number generator. There would still be some susceptibility to hacking from what I understand. So I'm not saying it could never be done, but I think it would be a long way off, and definitely the laws would need to change for us to be able to get even close to moving in that direction. I mean, we're not permitted to have instant tickets, much less online gaming. And then there's the issue of how do you integrate problem gambling and interventions into that kind of system. There also may be some issues. I'm certainly not super well versed on this, but you know, right now as states control or quasi-control lotteries, for example, our lottery, about 57% goes back to winners. In this new blockchain lottery, fire lottery that's being stood up or standing up, about 70% goes to players. So to me, it looks like it would be a great deal for winners, but that the state's opportunity to collect revenue would be greatly reduced unless, you know, laws were changed and there were things done to change that. But part of the whole issue is more autonomy for the player. Right now, we do track every purchase that's made. We know the minute a ticket is sold, where it's sold, what kind of ticket, so on. But we don't know the player We don't know the name of the person. We build our player database in other ways. So I think while nothing's ever impossible, it's not a subject that, as I go back to the multi-state lottery association meetings, which is often where all of our jurisdictions get together, this has never once come up. So I'm not sure what other jurisdictions are thinking. We have a meeting coming up June the 10th. I'm certainly willing to ask about it if you would like. And right now, the biggest issue on the table is the new ruling on sports betting and what we're going to do with that. But that still requires a terminal. So hopefully I'm answering your questions.
Could you specifically touch on courier services?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I know what you mean by that.
Okay, so courier services exist in other states, California, New Jersey. They've all kind of done, and multiple other states. And that basically is an entity resells tickets. So, for example, instead of you going down to the store and purchasing them directly yourself, you would purchase them through an app, and then somebody purchases them for you, and it's just kind of a resell application.
Mr. Chairman, this is the first I've heard of it. And certainly we stay abreast of current trends when we get together with other lotteries, but I have to say I hadn't heard of it before. I've heard of the concept, but not of any specific jurisdiction doing it. I'll have to look at what New Jersey's doing. I mean, second chance drawings is a big deal where you give people a second opportunity to use a purchase ticket. But in terms of, we don't explore things that are in that vein too often because of the restrictions we have here in Wyoming that only allows for draw games and a player interface and so on. So what we focus on and try to capitalize on are things that we can do within the law. And those are pretty limited, but I'll certainly do what I can to find out more about this and return and maybe answer the question a little bit better.
Okay. Any other questions? Mr. Kaufman.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to chime in. And full disclosure, I work with these people on a daily basis. I'm the Wyoming Lottery Corporation's attorney. And so to a couple of your questions, Wyoming statute's incredibly restrictive on the Wyoming Lottery on almost everything you mentioned. I attend on a bi-monthly basis attorney meetings for all the attorneys that represent lotteries across the country. And what you mentioned about the courier services, for example, our lottery statute only authorizes the Wyoming Lottery Corporation and their network of retailers to sell tickets. That's it. So it would be incredibly restricted. With respect to tracking players, again, through the work of this legislature, our statute only permits players to buy tickets via cash. So it's very difficult to create some type of a traceable transaction record.
Cards.
Yeah, no, debit cards were outlawed.
Well, Mr. Chairman, can I say something about that, Matt?
Yeah.
That's one of the biggest frustrations that we have is that we try to maximize revenue, which is my main responsibility. It's very difficult to try and modernize or take a step forward in terms of improving revenue when we're not permitted to produce instant games. There's some concern over whether or not we'll be able to launch Keno, which is the next big game for us. We started talking about allowing debit cards, but not credit cards, of course. And before I could turn around, there was a law saying we can't. So that seems to be the reaction anytime we try to enter into. So I would be flabbergasted if the discussion about online opportunities even made it out the door. That doesn't mean we wouldn't continue to try, but it's very, very tough and restrictive, as Mr. Kaufman said. So we don't spend a lot of time focusing our attention and effort in those areas, but it would be great if we could do some of those things.
Sure. Any other questions?
The last point I wanted to make with respect to the question about sort of the random number generators, the centralized access and decentralizing that. There are consortiums that the Wyoming Lottery has to belong to, like any other state lottery, to be able to license and sell those games to players. We don't have any control. Right. We, being the Wyoming Lottery Corporation, doesn't have any control over those databases, nor would I imagine anyone anytime soon is going to be talking about decentralizing that. There's been some recent issues with hacking attempts and things like that. So nationally speaking, I'm just telling you, there's a conversation. We don't control that conversation, but there's a conversation to even tighten the
Yeah, I think when it comes to like Powerball and those types of things, absolutely, that's not your game. But when it comes to Wyoming-based games, you do have that opportunity, and that's where the question is headed. Yeah, go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Klontz, so one of the first things you said is that there's a question on the legality of online gaming, and I'm just wondering if you could speak with more specificity on that. Are you? I'm not sure if you're suggesting that it's because our statutes are so restrictive, or if you're suggesting something on a more national level regarding federal law, and if you could speak more directly to that.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Olson, I was speaking more globally about that. I mean, certainly we wouldn't be able to do it here, but that's the same issue that most lottery jurists, if not all, face, issues with federal laws and online gaming in the United States, not across the world.
Follow up.
Well, so I have actually I have a different question, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Representative.
And I'm learning about the lottery as you speak.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you said 70% of the winnings go to the state. Is that?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Olson, I've studied the blockchain issue and this new fire lottery that has started a very little bit, but from what I read, that model returns about 70% back to the players because it eliminates some of the distribution costs. So right now, for example, we return about 57% back to players. Those payout percentages are set by these consortiums and multi-state associations, Powerball Consortium, and so on, with the exception of our in-state game where we set the percentage. The total average of that, we pay about 57% back to the players. What I was trying to say is that under this example model of blockchain lottery that's happening right now, they boast in the article of 70% going back to winners, but certainly that would mean less going back to a state or to the distribution going out to help cities, towns, and counties, or education, or whatever the case may be. So from what I got from it, if I was an independent operator, me and a few other people wanted to start it, it would be great if I got 5% or 7% of the profit. But it didn't add up to me in terms of being what a state intends to happen when they authorize a lottery. And that's to get enough of a return to transfer money to the Treasury and other places and so on.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead,
so
Representative.
that is, of course, unless we structure the returns differently so that the state does receive a benefit. And I think that the concept would be that you are opening the lottery globally. And so you have more players and therefore more revenue. And so I think the question really is how you structure the winnings. But so as a follow-up, Mr. Klotz, can you tell me how many or what percentage of our players are travelers? So they are not Wyoming-based residents? I'm sure that we have an ability to track that. And what does the spread look like?
I'll jump in here why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Olson, I don't think we can actually track where people are traveling from. We do know that we have large sales in Evanston and places like that because we do have people from Utah coming into Wyoming to purchase their tickets, but we can't really track who is purchasing the ticket. So when you go to a retailer, we can track when the winning ticket was purchased, but we don't know who bought it. It's not tied to any person or profile.
Representative Olson, if we talked about this a lot, this question, I've been asked this question an awful lot. And we know that sales are extremely high, especially during the tourist season over in the Evanston area. And we know that people in Utah are playing an awful lot. We know that from talking to the director of the Idaho Lottery, we took about 7% of that business, according to them. So we've got these kind of numbers, but to really, truly be able to track it, we would have to have the retailers ask the player to give them their zip code, for example, and write it down or log it in. So it's not impossible to gather that type of information, be a little bit labor intensive. But right now we just track transactions and not anything personal about the player.
Thank you. Any further questions? I guess I have one. So, sir, you'll be testifying to the Appropriations Committee.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, and that'll be coming up in June.
Correct.
Okay. So in regards to courier services and what that would look like statutorily, I've been in contact with Chairman Nicholas and going in that route and kind of freeing your abilities up to move forward in the future. I would like for you to present, if that's okay with you, present to the Appropriations Committee on what those statutory changes look like. I think that's more fitted and best suited for the Appropriations Committee versus this task force, but it is something that was via blockchain in my own studies has been kind of brought up as a possibility, knowing what other companies have done. So if that's all right with you, sir.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. We'll work on that, and I'm sure Matt will assist me as he always does, or Mr. Kaufman, and we'll be prepared to answer questions a little bit better and dive into it, and we'll be ready to deal with it and see what I can find out for you, and happy to attend. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any further questions in regards to that? Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much for having us.
Very much appreciate it. We're going to go ahead and go to public comment on either subject. You can come down for the Department of ETS or the Wyoming Lottery. And Mr. Jennings?
I'll be real brief because I know everybody's hungry, including myself. My name is Rob Jennings. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I did want to pass, actually, this is great, Matt. I'll give you the phone number, but a gentleman from a company called MidoPlay, MIDOPLAY, contacted the Blockchain Coalition through Caitlin on May 4th. And they are actually doing a multi-state lottery platform blockchain with Deloitte Touche and Perkins Coie law firm. They're based out of San Francisco, and I will give you that gentleman's phone number. I did pass it to Brian Patterson.
I think he's actually behind you in the audience.
Oh, who is?
The individual from MidoPlay.
Oh, are you? Oh, he's right there. Okay, well, I got your email. Sorry. There he is. So now you know we're doing our job. So that's that, and thank you for coming. And then also to Mr. Moore's point, we have been getting a lot of phone calls to the coalition about all these different startup companies with a lot of different little widgets and services that could be utilized in state and local and county governments. So one of the things that I think would be good coming out of this, if there was a way, if there was a little private public task force or something where we could send these, I think there's a lot of people that would probably give up their tech for free or, you know, just to find a good use case. And I've argued for a long time that Wyoming is the home of a million great use cases because we have a low barrier of entry. You can call up the county clerk or the hospital or, you know, these different places. So it would be phenomenal to be able to centralize and send these people, and then they could, the government, state government could look and say, hey, wow, this guy's got this. So there's a lot of free tech. I don't want to call it free, but certainly a lot of people looking for tech opportunities and use cases that I think we could steer to Mr. Moore. So that would be my only point there. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Jennings? No. Thank you, Mr. Jennings. Appreciate it. Yeah, I think and make sure to state your name for the record, and welcome MidoPlay.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity. My name is Kevin Kramer. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of MidoPlay. We're a 5-year-old software company. We have an existing product, and we've raised over $5 million, closer to $8 million around kind of courier service and mobile lottery, blockchain-based lottery solutions. We're extensively leveraging blockchain in our technology stack and are working on a couple of dimensions that may, Mr. Clance, work very well with Wyoming. We'd love to, I appreciate the opportunity to be here to meet with different partners and think about how we could partner to have a shared vision on leading the way in new business ideas to be enabled and grown with blockchain and other supporting technologies. Lottery is actually a perfect use case for the application of blockchain to create digital distribution channels and new global games that can leverage and extend the existing lottery infrastructure with significant cost, market reach, security, and transparency benefits. I'm not sure if people are aware, there's a guy who worked for the Multi-State Lottery Association who rigged the numbers for Hot Lotto, who's currently spending 25 years in jail. In Pennsylvania years ago, they put little extra weights on the balls to make the balls come to the right thing. So the idea of an immutable ledger and provable, fair, and random results and the transparency provided with blockchain is actually a really key enabler to being able to trust lottery games. A little about our company, we're not trying to compete with lotteries. You mentioned Fire Lotto, which is one of several offerings that have come out there, several private offerings. They're more gambling. They're trying to compete with lotteries and draw attention away from lotteries into online digital channels. And with the recent Supreme Court ruling about sports gambling, that's also going to, I think, compete with lottery. Lottery is, as you mentioned, you have to get cash and you have to go to a corner store to buy lottery tickets. So there's a huge audience of people that you're missing out on who don't want to do that. We've had people tell us it's an epic endeavor to go get a lottery ticket because I have to fill out bubble forms, I have to get cash, I have to go to the store, I have to buy it. And so, you know, we're a 6-year-old company. We have a product on the Apple App Store that allows people to purchase lottery tickets, California lottery products right now.
Mr. Kramer, do you not like Android? Is that where I'm?
Android's coming out in about a week or so, so we're getting there. We had to start somewhere. If you have an iPhone, I can send you a text message that includes a Powerball ticket and a gift to a Powerball ticket. So find me at lunch and I'll send you a Powerball ticket on your phone.
Don't do that for task force members. Do not do that.
But you know, we have a team that's created massive payment platforms for companies like Citibank and CyberSource and Visa. Our advisors, if you look at the ICO space, there are a lot of companies who don't, you know, we heard the Wile E. Coyote mentioned earlier. We're working closely with Perkins Coie, who's leading the safe harbor initiatives with the SEC around regulation, working with Deloitte on the tax perspective. We have investors and advisors, including people from Camelot who run the UK Global Lottery, including the Ashcroft Group, the law firm founded by former Attorney General Ashcroft. We have 4 issued US patents around multi-jurisdictional lotteries, games, groups, gifting, and mobile, because lottery is not investment, it's entertainment. And it should be mobile, it should be social, and it's not. It's go to the store and buy a ticket and hold on to it in your pocket, hope you have it. So we're building a global lottery network on the blockchain to really help revolutionize the lottery industry. As a partner to regulated lotteries, we want to be a software provider, much the way the Multi-State Lottery Association is a partner that's offering Powerball and Mega Millions. We want to be a partner to offer a mobile distribution channel and new games that can really provide better security, reliability, transparency, and cross-border efficiency. We're designed to be used as a white label platform by the lotteries to reach their customers better. Some of the things that came up earlier around tracking customers and such and problem gambling, you can actually control because you're registering people and you have their contact information. You get a lot more insight into who your customers are. We're preparing for a token generation event, which is kind of the more delicate way to say ICO, in the way of ICOs getting a little tainted with people taking the money and running. And we'd like to be part of the existing ecosystem here in Wyoming. I think your watch is going off again.
That's Mrs. Blackburn, Representative Blackburn's wife.
Mr. Chairman, I think our goals overlap in many ways. That MitoPlay wants to lead the world in offering new ways to play the lottery. We believe our platform can help Wyoming add new players, both in-state and internationally, and create new games that might cut the cost associated with the lottery infrastructure and significantly increase the revenues that the state could gain from the lottery infrastructure. We've already built in compliance and security features to meet the requirements to enforce responsible gambling controls and spending limits and those type of things, which you actually can't do if someone's taking cash to the corner store. And by partnering early and engaging often, I think MitoPlay in Wyoming can increase state revenues while showing tangible state benefiting application of blockchain technology to really extend Wyoming's leadership in this space.
Mr. Kramer, do you have any, I mean, just as a, I'm guessing you've looked at Wyoming's revenues from our current lottery system, and you already operate in another state. So I'm just curious if you have any guesstimates in regards to what that would look like in Wyoming.
It could range anywhere from 5 to 50x increase in lottery revenues for Wyoming, depending on what audiences we choose to go after. There are actually quite a few people operating in the courier service model, which our business model can afford, but we'd rather be a partner to Wyoming, where people in Australia will actually pay $10 or $20 for a big Powerball jackpot. When Powerball hit $1.5 billion a couple of years ago, there were tickets to Powerball, $2 tickets being sold in Australia for $20. There's a lot of international demand for high jackpot games. Europe came up with an idea of Euro Millions, which doesn't quite have the jackpots of Powerball, but it gets closer where Powerball starts. And the chair of board member Euro Millions is one of our advisors. He works for Camelot Games. We've been working closely with lotteries and others, and there's a big global appetite for games like Powerball. And I believe that Wyoming could, in partnering with us, lead the way and capture some of that international demand for Powerball tickets, and that would be within the statutes. In fact, we've reviewed Article 9, Chapter 17 in great detail, and I think that the opportunities for partnership are very much in line with the charter for the Wyoming Lottery Corporation. In particular, the charter is to be an entrepreneurial enterprise to provide continuing entertainment, maximizing revenues, and operating with integrity and dignity. And if I think about those key kind of themes, entrepreneurial enterprise should be looking at new technologies of how to do this. Integrity is really all about provable, fair, and random results. And if you look at some of the fraud that's happened in the past in lotteries, including Hot Lotto and the Multi-State Lottery Association, there's risk there that I think blockchain could do. The immutable ledger and public transparency really increases the integrity. Expanding sales to mobile users and possibly international audiences maximizes revenues. And enforcing responsible gaming practices ensures dignity beyond what's possible today in the currently deployed solution. In our most effective partnership, we'd become a direct technology agent of the Wyoming Lottery Corporation, which is allowed. The Wyoming Lottery Corporation is allowed to sell directly to consumers as the retailers are allowed to sell to consumers. I believe that there are two regulations that Mr. Columbus brought up that certainly would need to be looked at, one of which is allowing for new forms of payment. The gentleman earlier said thinking of allowing cryptocurrency for online gaming. That was brought up earlier. Also, debit cards, credit cards with the appropriate gambling controls would help to enable this. And secondly, the game definition is restrictive in the way that it says that the person cannot touch the gaming device. So it's part of the prohibition of video poker terminals and everything else. But the retailers are at a high cost to the lottery corporation. There's a big network of machines that are all being managed in retail locations and deployed and repaired in retail locations. Yet every one of us has a little supercomputer in our pocket in which we could self-service, choose numbers, and buy lottery tickets and not have to keep maintaining that infrastructure over time and go towards a full digital lottery solution. Retailers could deploy a tablet as they do for other solutions and not have to have these paper ticket terminals and everything else where you could really get to a full digital lottery. So we've done a fairly detailed evaluation. I've got comments across a document in the legislation where I don't think it would be too complex to be able to enable some of this stuff. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here and present, Mr. Chairman. Happy to answer questions. And so good to be back in Wyoming.
Any questions for Mr. Kramer? Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kramer, you spoke to something that's really important when we talk, at least in my mind, about the lottery, and that was integrated intervention and counseling for gaming addiction. And I learned something today that I didn't know, which was that my lottery commission in Wyoming doesn't even track who it is that is actually purchasing the tickets. So how we're able to intervene when there is a serious issue, I don't understand. But it sounds to me like the system that you're envisioning can provide greater intervention. And I'm just wondering if you could speak a little more in detail to that for me.
Mr. Kramer.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Representative Olson. Because we require people to register to download our application and use the application, we do age verification to make sure they are over 18. And we're tracking usage and spend, and we're tracking multiple dimensions, not just the registered name they give us, but also a device ID and other, latitude, longitude, other items. We can really pin this down to who is buying from us. And in order to be able to distribute payment back to them, they have to give us their contact information. So we are doing email verification, phone number verification, and a lot of security around that to know who's there so we can identify troublesome patterns that can emerge. And we have already built into our technology, and this is technology that's been out there for a while to allow for mobile lottery ticket purchases. We can put in spending limits that can go by individual, by product, by class of service, other types of things. There's a lot of flexibility with enforcing spending controls in that way. And if I've answered that question, I actually want to bring up something you brought up earlier, Representative Olson, about big games. Our vision for this over the long haul, and we'd love Wyoming to be a charter member of this, is to create the global ball game. We are working on a utility token offering, which will be used to power our lottery network. And because cryptocurrency allows for the trust and the multi-currency and cross-border efficiencies that it does, we actually think that rather than having Powerball, which might reach 400 million every 8 to 16 weeks, we could have a global ball game. We're in conversations with Camelot about taking this to the UK as well, where you have a multi-billion-dollar jackpot game that might run once a week that would draw quite a bit of attention and quite a bit of interest in lottery. And then each participating jurisdiction, for example, Wyoming, would capture their share of the good cause revenue from sales within Wyoming, and you get a lot more interest in the game if there's a $1 billion jackpot than if there's a $30 million Powerball jackpot. So that the study showed that there's a exponential level of interest. When Powerball was at 1.5 billion in, I think it was 2015 in January, they sold almost $1 billion worth of tickets in 4 days because there was so much interest. The jackpot went from 900 million one week to one drawing to almost 1.5 billion the next. And that's so in order to get that much revenue, but much additional cash into the jackpot, they had to sell about $1 billion worth of tickets to do that. So these big games happen. And what we're really trying to target is, a new class of consumers who aren't really being reached by the lottery. It's people with credit cards and smartphones. And, I live in San Francisco. Not many of my friends play lottery. It's actually hard to find a shop in San Francisco where you can actually buy lottery tickets. People have interest. Part of what we're looking at is making lottery social and mobile, where I can give tickets to people. I have a friend who's a plastic surgeon that I called at 10:30 at night a few months ago because my child cut his eye. And I was like, I sent a picture. Should I stitch this? Should I not stitch it? I don't know what to do. What's my thank you for that advice? He's well-wired in San Francisco. I sent him a few lottery tickets and said, hey, thanks a lot. And Facebook, instead of saying, hey, happy birthday, let's send you a few lottery tickets. And maybe this will change your life as a birthday present. So if you set up groups, make it social, make it mobile, make people interact, reach a new class of consumers, that alone can drive a big increase in revenues. I think the lottery corporation would support that.
Mr. Kaufman.
Mr. Kramer, just to clarify, to make sure we're on the same page. So the only prohibitions that you and I see in the Lottery Act to what you're talking about would be, first, we don't allow any way to purchase a ticket except for cash, which is a big problem. Secondly, the definition of games is incredibly narrow, right?
Correct.
And then I thought you mentioned a third one, but I don't remember what you said.
Those are the two main ones. Payment might include crypto or debit or credit cards.
Okay.
And then the definition of games, we are happy with we built technology that can do scratchers and other things. We actually built a mobile app prototype for IGT. IGT is one of the largest vendors to the lottery industry. You guys work with it. Wyoming works with a different vendor called Intralot, but IGT is one of the largest technology vendors. They have about $1 billion contract to run California. We actually built a prototype for them of a mobile IGT terminal that they could roll out on the phone. So we've been doing this, but back to your question, that we don't need to redefine the games. We're very happy with draw games. We're supporting draw games now of California Super Lotto Plus and Powerball and Mega Millions. It's just a matter of a strict read of that legislation says the user cannot interact with the gaming device. I don't know if you consider the phone to be the gaming device or not, but I think the goal of it was to prohibit video poker terminals and slot machines and other types of things where you're touching the device. And as Mr. Clont said, having a person there. And I think part of the person there intent was probably to enforce responsible gaming. And if we can enforce responsible gaming within the application as opposed to a person being there buffering the purchase of tickets, those two areas which would need to be looked at. Yes, sir.
Follow up? No? Any other questions for Mr. Kramer? Seeing none, thank you very much, sir. And I was going to let you know, Mr. Kramer, I don't know if you'll have the opportunity to attend or not, but the next meeting that the Wyoming Lottery will be attending is the Appropriations Committee, and that's on June 11th and 12th. And that'll be in Cheyenne, Wyoming at our temporary legislative building. So if you have the opportunity to attend, I know they would appreciate your testimony.
Thank you. And we'd be very happy to work with Mr. Klontz and the Lottery Corporation to prepare for that testimony and provide some of the detail we've got. And if we can find a way to enable them to drive more revenue into the state of Wyoming and better serve the community, it would be great.
Great. Thank you, sir. Mr. Allen?
Chairman Lindholm, members of the task force, I wanted to respond to the other topic, which was the ITS. In specific, in regards to the need for a Wyoming blockchain or validators or things of that nature. And Somebody earlier mentioned, public-private partnerships. I'm a big fan of that type of thing. And that is actually the strategy that Homeland Security and the U.S. government is doing as well. I wanted to briefly read to you, they did to the Congress a hearing about their use of blockchain technologies and encouraging their strategy for blockchain technologies. So this is a quote by Anil John. The challenge with blockchain technology is the potential of development of walled gardens or closed technology platforms that do not support common standards for security, privacy, or data exchange. This could limit the growth and availability of a competitive marketplace of diverse, interoperable solutions for government and industry to draw upon to deliver cost-effective and innovative services based on blockchain and distributed ledger technologies. To that end, Department of Homeland Security is pursuing 2 broad courses of action to encourage a more open and inclusive future for blockchain technology. They are supporting development of globally available specifications, which are precursors to standards that are open, royalty-free, free to implement, and to ensure interoperability while ensuring no vendor lock-in. And then they're actively working with their own purchases to have those requirements in their R&D and technologies. He ends, we believe that our careful and considered approach benefits not just us, but everyone who is considering use of blockchain technology in the long term by ensuring that there is no vendor lock-in and that there are multiple vendors with interoperable solutions from which we can buy. I think this makes sense for you to consider as sort of a generic strategy and policy so that you can try out a vendor to solve a particular problem for a particular department, such as the Department of State's registration needs, which are going to be very different than, say, the educational department needs, as opposed to something that is a unique Wyoming blockchain solution, which I think you're bearing more risk with that.
Right. Any questions for Mr. Allen? Ms. Long?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I do have a question. How does the funding of development of something like that work? I can see why there's a real benefit to having, an open source version of the registration software at the Secretary of State. But how does it work? You're an expert in working with standards organizations and software foundations that will pay developers to write open source code. How might we envision something like that if we do end up working on an API for Wyoming?
So there's sort of 2 phases. Phase 1 is the more research phase, and this is where a certain amount of money has already been spent by Homeland Security. For instance, a company in Utah, which you may be familiar with, Evernym, got $1 million. Well, it's 2 phases. I think the first phase was 100, second phase was $1 million from them on establishing a identity-oriented blockchain, which they've done. It's called Sovereign. It was submitted to Hyperledger. So that's helped bootstrap their development and ability to get additional investors because Homeland Security looked over their stuff and had some requirements from them. Among those requirements were that it all be open source, and that's what they did when they made it available through Hyperledger Indy. They are in the process of negotiating with a variety of government and non-government organizations to be a vendor for that particular technology. But there are other companies, including another company that got $1 million grant to kind of bootstrap this stuff, which is Digital Bazaar, Veris One. There's some other ones that did not get those grants, like Consensus Uport, if you may have heard of that. We're all kind of trying to make our stuff interoperable so that you would have the opportunity to, again, that particular thing was focused on digital identity, but you can choose from those and kind of have an expectation that there'll be interoperability and common standards for how they work, how they function.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Allen.
Thank you.
Any further public discussion?
Seeing none and sensing everyone's hunger, I'm going to close discussion or close public testimony. Any further discussion from the task force or actionable items that the task force would want to take in regards to the previous heard discussions? Seeing none, we'll close testimony in regards to that. Task force members and to the public, we're going to go ahead and take an hour break lunch. So 2:15, we'll gavel back in. Mr. Land, could you put like a piece of paper on the door, just letting folks know what time we'll be, because doesn't stick with our timeline very well. So 2:15, gavel back in. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Oh, go ahead, Senator.
Real quickly, for those that aren't used to the campus, Rendezvous is a place we can get sandwiches, Mexican food, salads. It's right over in Ross Hall, first floor. It'll be open until 2, so we can still get lunch there.
Okay. Thank you, Senator. We're adjourned, or not adjourned, recess.